Rhaegar Targaryen felt the hush in the air as vividly as he felt the river's current lapping around his legs. The banks of the Trident were thick with mud and red with the blood of the fallen, but in that breathless moment when Robert Baratheon's warhammer slipped from his grasp and disappeared beneath the swirling water, time itself seemed to hold still. It was as if the entire realm paused to witness what had long been foretold and yet seemed impossible to achieve. Rhaegar Targaryen victorious and Robert Baratheon on his knees, panting in the shallows, chest heaving, eyes filled with the shocking realization of defeat. The Targaryen prince's silver-gold hair, soaked with river water and streaked with the gore of battle, clung to his cheeks. His black armor, inlaid with rubies that glistened like drops of fresh blood, bore dents and fresh scratches from Robert's ferocious strikes. He could still feel the reverberations of that warhammer against his breastplate, as if his ribs were still vibrating with the force of the blow. Yet he remained standing, sword in hand, the cold steel pointed at Robert's broad chest. A hush fell over the men on the banks, the knights and soldiers of both sides. Those loyal to Rhaegar, battered but exultant, watched in taut silence. Those who had followed Robert cast fearful glances among themselves, uncertain whether to charge or flee. Robert sank to one knee, spitting blood. The sunlight filtering through high clouds made the water behind him gleam like polished metal, the ripples swirling red. Slowly, grimacing in pain, he lowered his head, acknowledging the man who had beaten him. A twist of fate, a turn of skill, or the blessing of the gods, whatever force had put Rhaegar's sword to Robert's side at precisely the right moment. It had changed the course of history. Rhaegar felt the dryness in his throat and realized he had scarcely breathed in what felt like an eternity. He forced his voice to emerge clear enough to be heard by all. "Yield," he commanded softly, the single word carrying over the water like a distant peal of thunder. Robert's eyes flared with a mixture of hatred and profound loss, but at last he spoke. "I yield," he managed, voice hoarse, the short sentence as heavy as the warhammer he had so often wielded. For an instant Rhaegar felt dizzy. Was it relief? Or was it sorrow for all that had transpired and all that could never be undone? He gestured to two Kingsguard knights who stood on the muddy bank. They approached cautiously, mindful of Robert's muscle-bound form. Though defeated, the Storm Lord was not a man to be taken lightly. Yet Robert did not resist, he appeared too exhausted to stand on his own. The guards, glimmering in white armor dulled by the day's carnage, hauled him to his feet. The clamor of armies forced itself back into Rhaegar's consciousness. Men were crying out in pain, a wounded horse lay thrashing on the far bank, standard-bearers were collecting fallen banners from the mire. Across the wide plain of the battlefield, soldiers still fought in pockets, steel clashing on steel, but the heart of the battle had been decided here in the shallows. Robert was taken into custody, and his supporters, seeing their leaders capture, tossed aside their weapons in a ragged wave of surrender. Rhaegar trudged to the riverbank, feeling suddenly old, his limbs aching with each step. He turned his gaze toward the rows of watchers, searching for familiar faces. Ser Barristan Selmy, sword dripping but standing tall in his battered white cloak. Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, tall and imposing astride his destrier, and beyond them, the loyal men of Dorne, the Reach, and those Crownlander knights who had followed him faithfully. Many stared at him in awe. They had believed in him, in the dream of a realm free from the madness that had gripped the Iron Throne. Yet now that the moment of triumph had come, the prince felt no sense of exultation, only the pounding dread of what would come next. He gathered his breath, lifted his sword high, and shouted, "The battle is done! Let no more men die this day!" His voice rang out over the battlefield, echoing among the wounded who moaned on the ground, mixing with the swirl of the river's current. The hush that answered him felt even more profound. Quietly, he beckoned the knights and lords nearest to him. He gave a series of terse commands. See to the wounded on both sides, show mercy to the defeated, gather arms. Above all, he wanted no more blood spilled. This war had already claimed too many lives. The realm cried out for peace and for justice. As Rhaegar moved away from the water's edge, Ser Barristan approached, helmet tucked under one arm. The scars on the Kingguard's face and the scratch across his cheek gave him a haggard appearance, but there was relief in his eyes. "Your Grace," Barristan said, bowing his head. The formal address felt strange, but Rhaegar understood. With the Mad King's hold on power weakening and Rhaegar openly challenging Robert's rebellion, the crown was effectively in question. By right of conquest over the rebel leader and by being the last Targaryen standing with any semblance of reason, Rhaegar was now the realm's hope or doom. "We must return to King's Landing," Rhaegar said quietly. "The city stands, but I do not know what the king, my father, may do when he learns of this battle." The thought filled him with dread. The Mad King would be unpredictable in victory or defeat. Rhaegar feared that if Aerys realized Rhaegar's success would overshadow him, it might spark another wave of paranoid cruelty. Barristan gave a solemn nod. "We should make haste. Tywin Lannister declared for your father only after you marched. If he sees a chance to seize power or to..." Rhaegar raised a hand. "Lord Tywin has ever been a creature of opportunity. I know he seeks advantage. I only pray we return before he can do much harm." Yet as he spoke, Rhaegar felt the weight of a different thought pressing on his mind, Lyanna Stark. He remembered the last time he had seen her, her eyes shining like winter starlight, her cheeks flushed with excitement or fear. He could scarcely recall the exact hue of her expression, for everything about that night was colored by the desperation of those final hours. She was within the walls of the Red Keep, watched over and protected for the sake of a prophecy Rhaegar believed might reshape the future of Westeros. But that prophecy, whether real or imagined, had been overshadowed by the rebellion and drenched in blood. He had to see her, ensure she was safe. Then there was Elia, his princess of Dorne, gentle of heart. And his children, Rhaenys and Aegon, who deserved a father more than a dream. He sheathed his sword and turned his back on the battlefield, forcing himself not to linger on the swirl of red in the waters. Stannis Baratheon and a few of Robert's men were being disarmed, marched away in chains. Others knelt in the mud, awaiting mercy. Rhaegar would give it to them if he could. He had come to this battle for more than victory. He had come for peace. They departed the Trident that afternoon. What remained of Robert's army had either fled into the countryside or succumbed to capture. Rhaegar's forces were equally spent, though their spirits were bolstered by the knowledge that the rebellious figurehead was now vanquished. The men walked or rode in subdued silence, passing between the bodies of the fallen, pausing occasionally to offer water to the dying. Rhaegar, though exhausted, insisted on checking tents of the wounded, ensuring that healers ministered to friend and foe alike. Some of his lords felt uneasy about this display of mercy. They whispered that Robert's men would have slaughtered them given the chance. Perhaps that was true. Yet Rhaegar would not let the bitterness of war dictate the future he hoped to forge. When at last the sun dipped low, a flickering orange orb on the horizon, the Targaryen host made camp. The cold breeze carried the iron scent of blood, and the men set small fires to ward off the chill. Rhaegar took a place near the central command tent where Robert was bound under guard. There, in the lamplight, he contemplated the next step. A raven had already been dispatched to King's Landing, carrying tidings of Rhaegar's triumph. But how would Aerys respond? There was another matter. Eddard Stark. Rhaegar had not seen him on the field. Intelligence suggested that Ned Stark was still alive, having parted from Robert before the decisive clash. He could be riding for the Vale or rallying further north. The loyalists from the north had been battered but not broken. Rhaegar feared that if the North continued the fight, more blood would be spilled. The only chance now was to negotiate a swift end to this rebellion before the realm was drowned in yet another wave of vengeance. And so, even before he had properly rested, he summoned Ser Barristan and Lord Connington, one of his few remaining close confidants, and outlined his plan: treat with Ned Stark as soon as possible, offer mercy to Robert if he publicly bent the knee, and institute a settlement that would ensure peace. Rhaegar knew it was risky. Men like Robert Baratheon and possibly Ned Stark might see mercy as a sign of weakness. Yet Rhaegar had witnessed enough destruction. If the realm was to heal, there must be forgiveness in victory. Barristan listened quietly, eyes reflecting the lamp's glow. "I fear many will not understand. They lost kin at Summerhall and at Duskendale. They saw the cruelty of your father. Even if you were different, your grace, they may not believe it." Rhaegar let out a weary sigh. "We cannot decide our path based on whether they believe us or not. We must show them through our deeds." Lord Connington, whose face was lined with worry, nodded. "I am yours to command, Prince Rhaegar. I only hope the realm has the wisdom to see that you were not your father." "Nor is my father king in all but name any longer," Rhaegar murmured. "He'll either see reason, or we will have no choice but to replace him." The words tasted of ash. He did not want to dwell on such betrayal. But how could he preserve the realm with a mad king on the throne? As the night deepened, Rhaegar unfastened his breastplate. He had not even wiped the blood from it before removing it, letting the heavy metal clatter to the ground. He sank onto a small wooden chest in his tent, the flickering lamplight dancing on the canvas walls, and closed his eyes. He saw the face of his father, twisted with suspicion and mania. He saw the faces of his children. Rhaenys so proud, Aegon barely old enough to grasp his father's finger and babble nonsense. He pictured Elia's warm smile and the way her eyes softened when she saw him strumming his harp. Then, unbidden, he saw Lyanna Stark's face. The moment outside the tourney stands at Harrenhal, the gentleness in her eyes that belied her fierce northern pride. He shivered, wondering what tomorrow would bring, wondering if any of them could survive the day that was to come. By dawn, the army was on the move again. Escorted by a contingent of Targaryen loyalists, Robert Baratheon sat slumped in a horse litter. His face was stony. Somewhere along the way, his brother Stannis had been taken as well, and though the two shared no words, Rhaegar saw their flickering glances. Hate radiated from both Baratheons, anger not only for Rhaegar's victory, but for the tragic events that had precipitated this war. The kidnapping or abduction of Lyanna Stark. In Robert's mind, that offense was unforgivable. Rhaegar didn't pretend otherwise, but he also knew there was truth behind Lyanna's choices, truths the realm might never understand. The closer they rode to King's Landing, the more hushed conversation passed among the soldiers. Rumors flourished that the Mad King had burned traitors alive within the city, that Tywin Lannister marched from the west with an army at his back, that the Stark host was nearing Moat Cailin in the north. With each step closer to the capital, Rhaegar felt the looming shadow of the dragon's lair, the place where a single spark of madness could destroy them all. Finally, one afternoon, after days of slow, measured travel with the wounded and prisoners, the towers and walls of King's Landing rose into view. Even from a distance, Rhaegar saw that something was amiss. The gates were wide open, guards slack on the parapets. The red gold lion of House Lannister fluttered from one of the towers. His heart sank. He spurred his horse forward, leaving the main host behind, accompanied only by Barrist and Selmy, Jon Connington, and a few outriders. They entered the city to find the streets eerily deserted in some quarters, while in others they were crowded with restless commoners. Men and women peered out from behind shuttered windows, fear in their eyes. Others knelt in the gutter, praying. There were rumors swirling about how Tywin Lannister had taken the city's gates in the name of King Aerys, that fires had raged through Flea Bottom, and that Lord Tywin had demanded an audience with the king, by force if necessary. The Red Keep awaited them. Passing beneath the massive barbican, Rhaegar saw Lannister soldiers posted alongside the gold cloaks. The stench of tension was thick as a snake pit. He realized that Lord Tywin had seized an advantage, expecting that Robert's rebels might sack King's Landing if they won at the Trident, or that if Rhaegar died, Aerys would need Tywin to defend the city. A hush greeted the Targaryen prince as he rode into the outer ward. The courtyard teemed with soldiers, a jarring mix of Lannister red and gold, Targaryen dragon cloaks, and the battered banners of loyalists. Rhaegar dismounted, ignoring the ache in his knees. He handed the reins to a stable boy, noticing the child's trembling. The boy recognized him, the rightful prince and living victor, though to the boy's eyes, perhaps just another man drenched in blood and burdened by the crown's heavy weight. Lord Tywin Lannister himself appeared on the steps. His pale green eyes flicked over Rhaegar's face and his lion-engraved armor flashed in the sun. He offered a small bow. "My prince, we have been awaiting you." Rhaegar approached, ignoring protocol, speaking plainly. "Where's the king?" Tywin's lips pursed. "In the throne room. He has been unwell. He refused to accept the outcome of your victory at the Trident, claiming you conspired against him. He has commanded his pyromancers to." He paused, then offered a small smile that did not touch his eyes. "But do not fret, my prince. The situation is under control. I have stationed Lannister men throughout the city to ensure that no rash orders are carried out." A flicker of anger flared in Rhaegar's chest. Tywin had taken it upon himself to occupy King's Landing as if it were his own. True, he might have prevented the king from enacting another atrocity, but Rhaegar knew Lord Tywin's brand of mercy was often more brutal than open war. He looked over his shoulder at Barristan, who gave a measured nod. Then he turned back to Tywin. "We will proceed to the throne room at once." They walked down the marble corridors, flanked by Lannister guards in place of Targaryen loyalists. The hush was unsettling, punctured only by the echo of boots on stone. Tapestries fluttered in the draft from open windows. Rhaegar steeled himself for what would come next. He remembered the last time he stood before his father in the Red Keep. He had pleaded for mercy for Rhaegar and Brandon Stark, pleaded for the chance to rectify the insult to House Stark after the fiasco with Lyanna. But the Mad King had refused. What followed was the horrific burning of the Stark patriarch and his heir, an act that had driven Ned Stark north to gather the banners of Winterfell. Now, as they neared the throne room, the heavy doors swung open, revealing a sweeping space lit by torches in iron sconces. Even in daylight, the chamber was dim, the stained glass windows caked with the residue of countless fires. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end on its raised dais, a twisted mass of swords that seemed to glower with a life of its own. And on that throne sat King Aerys II Targaryen, his once silver hair now a wiry nest of white, his beard long and unkempt, his eyes rimmed in pink as if perpetually inflamed by madness. Aerys's gaze snapped to Rhaegar the moment his son entered. There was a flicker of relief, fear, and then fury. "You dare return here, traitor?" Aerys's voice was a rasping hiss. Rhaegar swallowed. He advanced slowly, glancing aside at the rows of courtiers. Most were absent, replaced by a handful of trembling servants and pyromancer Rossart, who stood near the dais in his flamboyant robes. A few Lannister guards waited by the door, silent. Aerys rose halfway from the Iron Throne, gripping the armrest where melted steel threatened to slice an unwary hand. His nails were cracked, dried blood visible beneath them. "You think I do not see your treachery? You consort with my enemies. You spread rumors to gather support. You dare come back to usurp your rightful king." Rhaegar tried to steady his breathing. "Father, the rebellion is done. Robert Baratheon has yielded. The realm's blood need not be spilled any longer." "Lies," Aerys hissed. "Even now, the North conspires. They will lay siege to our gates, burn the city, kill us all." "Lord Tywin's presence here suggests otherwise," Rhaegar said carefully. "He has already taken steps to secure the city from any violence." At that, Aerys let out a sound between a laugh and a snarl. His eyes flicked toward Tywin, who stood some distance behind Rhaegar, hands clasped behind his back. "Traitors abound. I am surrounded by them." Then his attention snapped back to his son. "If the rebellion is over, then kill Robert Baratheon. Present me his head. That is how you prove your loyalty." The words rang in Rhaegar's ears. He felt a pang, a twisting inside him at the monstrous demand. He saw the hungry glint in Aerys's eyes. This was no longer just paranoia, it was the raw mania that had consumed him. "I will not do that." Robert yielded, Rhaegar said, his voice firm. "He is our prisoner. He will face justice, but not murder." Aerys took a step forward, a wild grin splitting his lips. "Justice? I am the only justice in this realm. If you refuse, then you are no son of mine." His voice rose in a shriek. "Pyromancers, light the caches. Burn them all." For a moment, Rhaegar's heart clenched. He was reminded of the rumor that Aerys had hidden wildfire beneath the city. That monstrous plan had blossomed after Duskendale, when fear had taken root in his father's mind and grown into unspeakable paranoia. Rhaegar's eyes flicked to Rossart. The man gave a slight nod to the king. "No," Rhaegar shouted, surging forward, but Aerys reeled back, stumbling against the spiked seat of the throne. A bead of blood formed where his skin caught on a jagged blade. "Father, do not do this." Rhaegar tried to keep his voice level. "The war is finished. The realm can be united under House Targaryen. You must stand down. The people cry out for peace." Aerys glared. "I will never stand down. I will see them all burn. It's the only way to keep the throne from traitors like you." Tywin stepped forward. "Your Grace," he said in that measured, icy tone. "Your city is surrounded by my men. My archers stand outside every known storehouse of wildfire. There will be no burning." "Guards! Guards!" Aerys shrieked. But no one moved from the corners of the throne room. The few loyal Targaryen guards exchanged glances, uncertain. Lannister men gripped the hilts of their swords. Rhaegar closed the distance and, with the swiftness of a swordsman, caught Aerys's arm. He felt his father's bones alarmingly frail under the rotting finery. Aerys's eyes widened with terror. "No, you wouldn't dare." "I have no choice," Rhaegar whispered, pained. "In the name of House Targaryen and the realm, his voice faltered. He wanted to say he was removing Aerys from the throne. Yet the words stuck in his throat. He felt a hand at his shoulder, Barristan Selmy, his expression grim but resolute. The King's Guard were sworn to protect the king, but they were also sworn to protect the realm. Barristan, ever loyal, had made his choice. Aerys thrashed, spittle flying from his lips. "Madness! Treachery. He clawed at Rhaegar's face. Rhaegar pinned his father's wrist. You would usurp me? You traitorous whelp, you half-breed spawn of the whore. Tears pricked Rhaegar's eyes at the venom in his father's voice, but he held fast, refusing to flinch. The realm cannot endure another moment of your tyranny, he said, each word quaking in his throat. You are unfit to rule. Aerys screeched, straining, until Tywin nodded to his men. They pulled the king from Rhaegar's grasp and pinned him in place. The Mad King screamed, hurling insults, curses, threats. Rhaegar forced himself to stand upright, cheeks burning. Rossart, the pyromancer, took a step forward but found himself staring at Tywin's sword point, swiftly drawn. The man's face paled. He made no move. Rhaegar drew in a shaky breath. Take him to his quarters, he commanded. Let him remain under guard. He shall be treated with dignity, but he is no longer fit to sit the Iron Throne. Tywin gave a slight inclination of his head. Yes, my prince. Aerys continued to howl even as they dragged him away, the echoes of his screams spilling out into the corridors. Rhaegar heard him reciting curses of fire, naming traitors, damning them all to the seven hells. The spectacle was as pitiful as it was horrifying. For a long moment Rhaegar stood in silence, gazing at the Iron Throne. The swords hammered together, the seat that had cut his father so many times seemed to watch him. Barristan stood at his side, silent. Tywin stepped forward, his eyes glittering with something akin to satisfaction. This day marks a new reign, Tywin said calmly. We shall proclaim you King Rhaegar, second of his name, rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. The city is secure. The rebellion is ended. Rhaegar did not answer immediately. He noticed he was trembling. The finality of it all, the knowledge that, in taking power, he had condemned his father, possibly to a living death in madness, lay on him like a crushing weight. It had to be done, he told himself. For the realm, for his children, for everyone. He forced himself to meet Tywin's calculating gaze. Thank you, Lord Tywin, he said. Your men will stand down now. Return the city watch to the command of the crown. Of course, Tywin replied with a graceful bow, though Rhaegar could sense the tension in the lord's posture. Tywin had likely hoped to keep a firm hold on the city even after placing Rhaegar on the throne. But Rhaegar would not permit such a usurpation. Barristan placed a gauntlet hand on Rhaegar's arm. Your Grace, he murmured, the new title heavy with meaning, it is done. Rhaegar exhaled. Is it, he wondered aloud, I still on the throne? He thought of Robert Baratheon locked away in a tower cell. He thought of Ned Stark who might still be in the field or retreating north. He thought of Lyanna, Elia, his children, and the people of the realm. There was so much yet to mend. Word spread quickly across King's Landing, and in a matter of hours, the lords, knights, and city dwellers learned that Aerys Targaryen was dethroned, replaced by his son Rhaegar, who had returned victorious from the Trident. Many in the city cheered. They remembered Rhaegar's kindness at the tourney at Harrenhal, recalled the songs he played, the gentle manner he showed to highborn and low. Others were cautious. The Targaryen name was as much a curse as a blessing after the horrors of the Mad King. But if the new king could bring stability, perhaps that alone would be a blessing. That same evening, Rhaegar ascended the steps to the Tower of the Hand, where a quiet chamber had been prepared for him away from the chaos. He had ordered the Grand Maester to see to Robert's injuries. Robert had been battered in the duel, but the Maester's skillful ministrations saved him from any mortal wound. Rhaegar paused at a side corridor, face to face with a Kingsguard knight, Ser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, who had only just arrived from guarding Lyanna Stark. Arthur inclined his head solemnly. Your Grace, he said, a brief but formal greeting. Rhaegar's heart thudded. Arthur. Is she? She is well, Arthur confirmed. His voice carried a hint of warmth. She has missed you, though she will not admit it. Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment. Relief washed over him. I must see her. And I must see Elia. My children. Arthur's gaze flicked away. He seemed to wrestle with words before finally saying, Elia has taken the children to safety within the Red Keep. She is worried, but she remains your loyal princess. As for Lyanna, she has her own concerns. She is unsure of what becomes of her now. A pang shot through Rhaegar. He recalled the hush in Lyanna's voice when she spoke of not wanting to be bound by the will of men. Yet their fates were so deeply entwined. He had believed the prophecy pointed to the union of ice and fire, himself and Lyanna Stark. But now as king, he had two women in his life who both claimed a piece of his heart. I will see them, Rhaegar said quietly. I must make sense of things. The realm needs answers, and so do they. Arthur nodded, stepping aside. I shall inform Lyanna you are coming. She awaits you in her chambers. With heavy steps, Rhaegar traversed the winding corridors. Memories twisted through his mind eye. The last time he and Lyanna had truly spoken, it had been outside Harrenhal's Godwood. She had laughed at something he said, and that laughter had reminded him of water dancing over stones. He had been entranced, drawn to her spirit. That moment, in its sweet clarity, now felt so distant, overshadowed by war and the burdens of fate. He paused outside her chamber door. A guard posted there stepped aside immediately. Rhaegar raised a hand to knock, but the door swung open on its own. Lyanna Stark stood there, clad in a simple gown of gray wool, her hair loose, as dark as a raven's wing. She had lost some of the rose in her cheeks, her face drawn with worry, but her eyes still held the fierce spark that had captivated him before. They stared at each other, neither speaking. Then Lyanna stepped aside to let him enter. The chamber was lit by a single oil lamp on a small table, its glow revealing a modest room with plain walls, a bed, a few chairs. She had never asked for riches or jewels. She had asked for freedom, for the chance to breathe without the constraints of betrothal to Robert or the stifling politics of the court. "I heard you won," she said at last, voice trembling with a mixture of relief and regret. "I heard you are king now." Rhaegar offered a weary nod. He did not know how to begin. "Yes. My father, I had no choice. I had to remove him for the good of the realm." She studied him, her gray eyes searching. After a moment, she reached out and touched his arm. The gesture was gentle, but it ignited a swirl of memories and longing. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I know how much it hurt you to do this." A wave of emotion flooded him. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from her presence. "So many have died, Lyanna? The realm is fractured. Robert. I have him in custody. I did not kill him." She inhaled, stepping back. "Then you are truly different from your father." Her words stung, for they reminded him of that monstrous legacy. But he nodded. "I intend to be. I want to bring peace. My father's reign is over, but the wounds he caused will not heal easily. And you, Lyanna, what is it you want now?" She seemed taken aback by the question. Her brow creased. "I want my family safe. My brother is dead. My father burned by your father's madness. My mother waits in Winterfell for news. My brother Ned is still out there. He might be heading back north. I don't know. And I want freedom." He heard the unspoken question. "Is that freedom possible now that you're king? Will you keep me locked in another form of cage?" Rhaegar swallowed. "I will not force you to stay against your will." The words came out carefully, though they made his heart ache. "If you wish to return to Winterfell, to your family, you may. But know that you have a place here if you wish it. I do care for you, Lyanna. I never wanted to see you hurt." She studied his face, searching. "What of Elia?" His voice faltered. "She is my wife and the mother of my children. I cannot forsake her. I care for her deeply. She is a good and gracious woman." He hesitated, uncertain how to convey the swirl of guilt and devotion he felt for both women. "It is complicated, but I will not set her aside." Lyanna's lips thinned. "Would you do the same to me if I were in her place?" The question cut to the core of his dilemma. Could he truly ask them both to share him, to bear the scorn of a realm steeped in tradition? Yet the Targaryens had, in ages past, taken multiple wives. It was frowned upon now, considered an abomination by many, and yet prophecy whispered in his mind, the song of ice and fire. "If you were the mother of my children," he murmured, "I would never cast you aside. But I do not ask you to accept such an arrangement if you cannot bear it. I will not demand it of you." He sighed, pressing a hand to his forehead. "The realm has endured so much, and I fear the scandal and the hatred it would cause if I have two wives. It might tear apart what remains of peace." Lyanna lowered her gaze. "I do not know what I want, Rhaegar. I only know I cannot return to Robert, not after everything. And I do not wish to be a mere shadow in someone else's world." She paused, her breath shaking slightly. "But I will not abandon you in this chaos if I can help bring about peace. I owe my father and brother that much." It was more than he expected. He reached out, taking her hand gently. "I understand. For now, rest. Let me handle the realm's immediate burdens. There is a place for you here, or in Winterfell, as you desire. I promise I will not lock you away. I want to see you free as you always wish to be." She nodded, and for a moment they simply stood there in the flickering lamplight, two souls bound by love, guilt, and the weight of destiny. When Rhaegar left Lyanna's chambers, he felt as if his heart were torn in two. But there was no time to dwell on personal strife. He made his way through the corridors to the royal wing, where he found Elia Martell in a small solar, cradling little Aegon in her arms with Rhaenys at her feet. The Princess of Dorne was as graceful as ever, though worry lines etched her brow. Her large, dark eyes lit up with relief at the sight of him. Rhaegar, she breathed, rising to greet him. Aegon stirred in her arms, letting out a soft coo. Rhaenys darted forward, arms open wide, and Rhaegar scooped her up in a tight embrace. "Papa," the little girl said, her voice trembling. "I was afraid." Rhaegar kissed her brow. "I am here. It's all right?" Alia's eyes grew moist as she laid a gentle hand on Rhaegar's cheek. "They said you defeated Robert. And you dethroned your father." He nodded, voice heavy with sorrow. "Yes. He is confined to his chambers under guard. The crown passes to me." Elia set Aegon in a cradle and reached for Rhaegar's hands. "I know how much that must have hurt you, my love. I am sorry." For a moment they simply held each other, the children pressing in close. Rhaegar felt a wave of gratitude for Alia's unwavering support. She had endured so much, the scorn of courtiers who whispered that her health was frail, the humiliation of rumors that Rhaegar had abducted Lyanna Stark. Yet she stood by him still. "Is it truly over?" Elia asked, voice trembling with hope. Rhaegar hesitated. "Not yet. Robert may yield, but Ned Stark remains at large. The North might not accept peace so easily after what was done to Ricard and Brandon. But I will try. I will try to unite the realm and bring an end to this bloodshed." Elia nodded. "If anyone can, it will be you." Her voice carried a quiet certainty. "What can I do? How can I help?" The question touched him deeply. He clasped her hands. "You have always helped me by being the grace and dignity that the realm needs in a queen. I will need you to speak with Lord Stark if he comes, to assure him that Dorne stands ready to help in healing the wounds." She nodded without hesitation. "I will do whatever is required." He lingered with his family as night fell outside, sharing quiet moments of comfort after so many months of fear. Rhaenys insisted on showing him a new dance she had learned, twirling around the room in a swirl of giggles. Aegon babbled happily in Alia's lap, batting at her hair. For the first time in what felt like an age, Rhaegar allowed himself to smile. But eventually, duty called him away once more. Messages were flooding in. The lords of the realm wanted answers. The Tullys, the Arryns, the Tyrells all had chosen sides in the rebellion. Where did they stand now that Rhaegar was king? Would they bend the knee or challenge his claim? And so, while the city slept fitfully, Rhaegar convened a small council in the early hours. Tywin Lannister attended, as did Barristan Selmy, Jon Connington, and Grand Maester Pycelle. The talk was grim and practical. "We must send envoys to all the great houses," Rhaegar said, pacing the chamber. "Extend full pardons for any who rebelled on the condition they swear fealty." Tywin's lip curled. "Full pardons? Even for those who have slaughtered your men, threatened your house's rule?" Rhaegar turned sharply. "Have we not slaughtered theirs? Do not speak as if we hold the moral high ground in a war that consumed the realm. If the fighting continues, we all bleed. If we allow bitterness to fester, the realm will break again as soon as another pretender rises. Let them see our mercy." Jon Connington exchanged a glance with Tywin, then nodded slowly. "Your Grace, if that is your wish, we will comply. But do not forget that mercy can be seen as weakness." Rhaegar clasped his hands behind his back, shoulders taut. "We will make it clear that any treachery after accepting our pardon will be met with swift justice. But we will not base our rule on terror. My father showed us where that leads." Barristan inclined his head. "The knights of the realm will appreciate a king who shows honor." Tywin said nothing more, though his eyes gleamed. Rhaegar suspected that the Lord of Casterly Rock would test him in the future, but for now, Tywin bowed to his authority. Word was dispatched by Raven at once. Within a fortnight, letters poured back in. Some houses yielded immediately, relieved to avoid further bloodshed. The Tyrells, who had remained largely loyal to House Targaryen through the war, expressed satisfaction and acceptance of Rhaegar as king. Dorne, too, rallied behind its princess's husband, though the Scorpion's sting would never be far from memory if they felt slighted. The Vale, under Jon Arryn, was more hesitant. Jon had been a father figure to Ned Stark, and Robert had fostered in the Vale. But after Robert's defeat, Arryn was in no mood to continue a hopeless war. He wrote simply, "I will bend the knee if Lord Stark does." That left the north. Eddard Stark had retreated, rumor said, to Moat Cailin, gathering what remained of the loyal bannermen who had followed him. Messengers claimed he was deeply distraught, mourning the deaths of Brandon and Ricard, and uncertain how to proceed with the knowledge that Robert was imprisoned, Lyanna was in King's Landing, and the Mad King had been dethroned. Rhaegar found himself pacing the yard at dawn one morning, pondering the next move. He had to speak with Ned Stark to show him that justice could be done without further bloodshed. Perhaps Ned would never forgive the Targaryen name, but if he could set aside vengeance, the realm would be spared more carnage. Finally, Rhaegar made a decision that startled his council. He would ride north himself, bringing Robert Baratheon as a prisoner, and meet with Eddard Stark under the banner of truce. Tywin bristled at the thought of the new king putting himself in danger. But Rhaegar insisted, "I will not appear cowardly by sending others to negotiate in my name. And I will not bring an entire army to the north. I will go with a small retinue escorted by the king's guard. If Ned Stark sees that I have come in good faith, he may parley." And so, on a crisp morning, Rhaegar set out from King's Landing once more, leading a small band of about 300 men, enough to ensure safety on the roads, but not enough to threaten a region as vast as the north. Robert Baratheon rode in chains near the rear of the column, guarded by white-cloaked knights. He had remained sullen and unresponsive in his cell, barely eating, occasionally gnashing his teeth at the mention of Targaryens. Rhaegar hoped that if peace could be made with Ned Stark, Robert might see the benefit. The journey took weeks, the weather growing colder as they passed the neck. The southern lords who had joined Rhaegar's entourage sometimes grumbled about the conditions, the chilly nights, the damp air from the bogs. But Rhaegar found a certain solace in the stark beauty of the north. He recalled the mystery that had drawn him to Lyanna, that quiet strength in her soul like a wolf's heart beating under a starlit sky. Eventually, they drew near Moat Cailin, that ancient fortress that guarded the approach to the north. Banners of House Stark flew over the ruined towers, and the muddy causeway bristled with men-at-arms. Rhaegar halted his host a short distance away and sent riders forward under a white flag to request an audience. They waited tense. When Ned Stark appeared, riding down from the fortress with a small escort, Rhaegar felt a wave of relief. Ned looked weary, older than his years, his gray eyes shadowed by loss. He wore simple northern attire, a fur cloak pinned with the direwolf sigil at his shoulder. Rhaegar advanced alone, flanked only by Barristan Selmy and Arthur Dayne. He stopped a respectful distance from Ned and inclined his head. "Lord Stark, I come in peace." Ned regarded him with quiet intensity. "Your Grace," he said at last, acknowledging Rhaegar's new title. "I received your message." Rhaegar could see Ned's throat work as he swallowed, as though unspoken words fought to emerge. They stood on a field of tall grass, the wind tugging at their cloaks. One wrong move, one sign of aggression, and steel would be drawn on both sides. Rhaegar chose his words carefully. "It was my father's cruelty that started this tragedy. He murdered your father and brother. I cannot undo that. But I can offer you justice, and I can offer peace. The realm is weary of war, Lord Stark." Ned's knuckles whitened on the reins. "Justice, you say? Is it justice that Rhaegar and Brandon lie in their tombs, while the man who burned them sits in a royal chamber? You deposed Aerys? But did you punish him?" Rhaegar held Ned's gaze. "I have confined him under guard for the rest of his days. He will never again harm another soul. If you wish to see him stand trial, I will allow it, but I fear his mind is gone, Lord Stark. Here can be no satisfaction in his madness." Ned's shoulders slumped slightly, a flicker of pain in his eyes. "What of Lyanna?" His voice grew softer. "Is she well?" Rhaegar took a slow breath. "She is healthy and unharmed. She has told me she wishes to see you. I would not keep her from you. If you agree to come under a banner of peace, I will see that you are escorted safely to King's Landing to meet with her." Ned gazed at him, searching for deception. Then he glanced behind Rhaegar, where Robert Baratheon sat astride a horse, his wrists bound. Robert's eyes smoldered with hatred, his face bruised. Ned's mouth tightened. "And Robert? He lost our duel," Rhaegar said simply. "His life is forfeit by the laws of war. Yet I have chosen not to execute him. I offer him a chance to live, if he will lay down his hatred and swear fealty. Should he refuse, I will have no choice but to hold him indefinitely, or—" He let the words hang. Robert snarled from his saddle. "I'll never bend the knee to a Targaryen," he spat, voice ragged. "You took Lyanna and you slaughtered my friends. Burn me if you must. I'll never yield." Ned cast Robert a pained look, as if seeing the friend he had once known turned into a cornered wolf. At last, Ned turned back to Rhaegar. "You speak of peace, your grace. Yet the North has lost much. You offer pardons. But how can I know this is not a trap to lure us into submission?" Rhaegar swallowed. "House Martell had greater cause for vengeance than any when my father murdered Elias' kin. Yet Dorne accepted my rule because they believe I am not my father. I have made no move to execute Robert despite every reason to do so. I have done everything I can to show mercy. If I wanted to crush the North, I would have ridden here with 10,000 men, not 300. Let that stand as my oath." Ned hesitated a moment longer, then slowly dismounted. Rhaegar did the same. The two men approached on foot. Ned studied Rhaegar's face, looking for truth or falsehood in his eyes. The wind whipped their cloaks around them, carrying the cold tang of the swamps behind Moat Cailin. Finally, Ned extended a hand. "For the memory of my brother and father, for my people who have suffered. I will talk peace. If Lyanna is well, and if you can truly ensure a just rule, I will bend the knee. But I will not forget the price of this war." Rhaegar clasped Ned's forearm. "Nor will I. The realm must never forget so that we do not repeat these sins." The rest of Ned's men looked on, some in shock, others with grim acceptance. On the Targaryen side, Barristan let out a quiet breath of relief. Robert only roared in frustration, straining against his bonds, calling Ned a coward. But Ned ignored him, focusing instead on Rhaegar. Rhaegar gave a single nod. "Then let us settle the terms. You will come to King's Landing under my protection. We will arrange a formal gathering of the great houses to swear fealty, and we will see that your father and brother are honored in the sept, if that is your wish. We will do the same for those loyal men of the North who died in the war. I will accept your service as Warden of the North, with all the rights and privileges. Their families shall be spared retribution." Ned's expression was tinged with sorrow and grim resolve. "I will accept those terms. I ask that any men of mine you hold prisoner be released. I ask also that Robert's fate be decided in a fair manner. I cannot stand by while my friend is put to death in cold blood." Rhaegar hesitated, glancing back at Robert. The man was trembling with rage. He would likely never forgive Rhaegar. But if Ned was to stand beside the new king, perhaps mercy must go even further. "I will not kill Robert, but if he refuses the oath, I can only keep him imprisoned. I leave it to you to convince him if you can." Ned nodded slowly, though doubt clouded his eyes. He knew Robert's hatred ran deep. Still, he had given his word to try. Thus it was that Eddard Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen forged an uneasy accord. The men shook hands, and the watchers, Northmen and Crownlanders alike, released sighs of tension. Rhaegar ordered the release of the northern prisoners forthwith and invited Ned's bannermen to accompany him south, guaranteeing their safety under his own royal pledge. In the days that followed, the combined party traveled back toward King's Landing, the newly minted king of the Seven Kingdoms riding alongside the solemn Lord of Winterfell. Though they did not become fast friends, they shared measured respect. Each day, Ned spent time speaking with Robert, attempting to soothe his fiery anger, but to little avail. Robert continued to hurl curses at Rhaegar, calling him dragon spawn, and worse. Despite Robert's obstinacy, the journey was far more peaceful than any might have expected. The men kept their weapons sheathed, hunts were shared, and a cautious civility grew between the North and the Targaryen loyalists. By the time the spires of King's Landing rose into view, the seeds of reconciliation had been planted. Whether they would bloom or wither remained to be seen. Back in the capital, Rhaegar arranged a grand assembly in the throne room. The lords of the great houses were summoned to witness the official crowning of King Rhaegar Targaryen, second of his name, and the pledge of fealty from those who had risen in rebellion. The hall was cleared of all but the highest nobles and the king's guard, the dais polished, the throne wreathed in fresh tapestries bearing the three-headed dragon. Yet even in this moment of ceremony, Rhaegar felt uneasy. Would House Stark's acceptance of him hold once he declared his intentions regarding Lyanna and Elia? Would the realm accept a Targaryen king who showed mercy to a rebel lord like Robert Baratheon? There were so many unknowns. At the appointed hour, the hall filled with the lords and ladies of Westeros. Mace Tyrell stood at the front, wearing green and gold, a careful smile on his lips. Prince Doran Martell had sent his brother, Oberyn, to observe on Dorne's behalf. Oberyn eyed the Lannisters warily from across the hall. Jon Arryn, older now and grave, stood near Eddard Stark, who wore a simple gray surcoat. Tywin Lannister remained near the dais in all his lion-engraved finery, watching with sharp eyes. Ned Stark stepped forward at the herald's call. Rhaegar, seated on the Iron Throne, watched him approach. Ned bowed stiffly, then knelt. A hush fell on the hall. In the name of House Stark, I swear my fealty to King Rhaegar Targaryen, and pledge the North to his realm, to stand loyal in peace and war, so long as he upholds the laws and justice of the land, Ned said, voice firm. The hush seemed to deepen. Rhaegar rose. He descended the steps of the throne until he stood before Ned. Gently he placed a hand on Ned's shoulder. I swear by the old gods and the new that I shall rule justly and honor my vows to guard the realm. Rise, Eddard Stark, Warden of the North. Ned rose, his face as stone, though a flicker of relief passed through his eyes. The watchers erupted in murmurs. Some seemed relieved, others surprised. The tension had begun to thaw, at least symbolically. Later, the other rebel lords or their representatives came forward, one by one, to pledge themselves. The matter of Robert Baratheon, however, remained unresolved. He stood at the back of the hall, chains removed but still guarded, eyes glittering with defiance. With each pledge, he let out a snort, but he remained silent at Ned's pleading glance. When the oaths were done, Rhaegar signaled for attention. I know this war has caused wounds that will not heal overnight, he said, voice resonating in the vaulted chamber. The harm my father did to the realm is incalculable, and I will spend my reign striving to mend it. Henceforth, I proclaim a general pardon to all who took arms against the crown, on the condition that they keep faith and remain true from this day forward. For the families of those who suffered, reparations shall be made from the royal treasury. For the North, who lost their lord and heir, we shall commission a grand memorial to Lord Rhaegar and Brandon Stark in the city, a testament to their valor. Let it be known that I, Rhaegar of House Targaryen, will not rule by fear, but by the laws of gods and men. He paused, scanning the room. There was apprehension in many faces, but also a glimmer of hope. To Lord Eddard Stark, I reaffirm my trust, naming him Warden of the North. To Lord Arryn, I continue his title as Warden of the East. To House Tully and House Tyrell, I thank you for your loyalty and service. To Lord Tywin Lannister, your unwavering support at the city gates protected King's Landing from ruin. Rhaegar chose his words carefully, aware of Tywin's cunning, and I name you once more Hand of the King, so that we may guide the realm together into an era of peace. Tywin bowed, a thin smile on his lips. The watchers whispered. The Lion had regained his old office. Some wondered if he would overshadow the new king as he had once overshadowed the old. At last, Rhaegar's eyes slid to Robert Baratheon. The Storm Lord's face was a mask of anger. Rhaegar drew a breath, beckoning him forward. Two Kingsguard knights stepped aside, allowing Robert to approach the dais. The hush that fell over the throne room was electric. Robert of House Baratheon, Rhaegar said, the rebellion is ended. Your friend and ally, Lord Eddard Stark, has bent the knee. Many of your men have accepted pardons. I offer you the same with one condition: you must swear fealty to the crown you sought to overthrow. Bend the knee and you shall have Storm's End returned to you with all your rights as Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. Refuse, and he let the silence speak for itself. For a moment, Robert did not move. The tension in the air mounted to a breaking point. Then Ned, standing beside him, said quietly, Robert, please. Robert glared at Rhaegar, thunder in his blue eyes. You took Lyanna, he said through gritted teeth. She was my betrothed. This entire war began because you. He stopped, swallowing rage. I will never forget that. But Ned asked me to do what's right for the realm. I owe him that much. He sank to one knee, but he did not bow his head. I swear fealty, he spat, each word tasting of bitterness. But if you ever hurt her, if you ever go back on your promises, I will kill you. A muffled gasp spread through the hall. Barristan Selmy's hand moved to his sword hilt. Rhaegar held up a hand, stopping him. He looked down at Robert, seeing the battered spirit of a once merry warrior turned bitter by grief and defeat. Perhaps in time, Robert might release his hatred, or perhaps not. But for the realm's sake, Rhaegar would accept this pledge. I will not harm her, Rhaegar said quietly. Rise, Lord Baratheon. The Stormlands are yours again. Robert stood. He glanced at Ned, his mouth twisting in scorn. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Ned's eyes were filled with sadness. Rhaegar felt a pang of regret. Peace had been achieved, but it was precarious, built on pain. When the assembly concluded, the realm was left in a state of fragile hope. The king who wore the Targaryen crown was not his father's son in spirit, and many saw reason to believe that better days might come. Yet the specter of old wounds hovered in every corner. Aerys was still alive, imprisoned, a living reminder of the horrors that had been inflicted. Robert Baratheon remained a dangerous ember of rebellion. Tywin Lannister's power in the royal court was formidable, and none could guess what webs he might weave. In the days that followed, Rhaegar set about dismantling the apparatus of terror left behind by his father. The secret stores of wildfire were turned over to the Alchemists' Guild for safe disposal. The worst of Aerys's torturers and confidants were exiled or imprisoned. Prisoners of war were freed, including those who had opposed the crown so long as they pledged loyalty. Rhaegar poured gold into rebuilding the damage from the conflict, aid to farmers who had lost crops, help for villages that had been sacked. He called for a grand convocation of maesters and lords to draft new laws that would limit the crown's ability to wage war without counsel. Eddard Stark spent some time in King's Landing, enough to see his sister Lyanna. It was a tearful reunion overshadowed by the knowledge of everything lost. Lyanna insisted she had chosen her path in part to avoid the fate of a loveless match with Robert and to follow a dream she had scarcely understood. Ned wanted to bring her home to restore the Stark family. She hesitated, torn between the home she loved and the vow she had made with Rhaegar. In the end, Lyanna chose to return to Winterfell for a time, to be with her mother, to grieve for Brandon and her father. Rhaegar let her go, though his heart twisted with longing as he watched her ride away under the dire wolf banner. Elia Martell remained at Rhaegar's side, quietly supporting him, even as whispers circulated about the king's heart belonging to two women. Elia's grace was her shield, and her love for Rhaegar and their children was unwavering. Still, in the quiet hours, she sometimes asked about Lyanna. Rhaegar, in turn, could only offer honest, pained words that he cared for Lyanna deeply, but he would never set Elia aside. The realm needed stability, not scandal. He hoped time would mend the rifts between them all, but he knew it might not. Months passed. With winter still holding the north in its icy grip, the realm settled into a wary peace. Word came from Winterfell that Lyanna Stark was healthy, but still restless. Ned wrote letters to the king, offering measured approval of Rhaegar's reforms. Robert Baratheon returned to Storm's End, occupying himself with hunts and feasts, though more than one raven carried rumors of his drunken tirades against that accursed Dragon King. In King's Landing, Rhaegar and his council worked tirelessly to restore order. The trade routes reopened, the harvest was salvaged, and lords began to focus on matters other than war. There were conspiracies to contend with, of course, Tywin's ambitions, the lingering resentment of certain lords who had lost kin. But, for the moment, the realm breathed free of mass bloodshed, and that alone was a victory. As the year wore on, a hush settled across the Seven Kingdoms. Farmers worked their fields, blacksmiths forged new plowshares instead of swords, and the small folk began to whisper that perhaps this new king was indeed different, that perhaps House Targaryen's madness had ended with Aerys's imprisonment. In some corners of Westeros, a song began to spread, one about the silver dragon prince who beat a stag in battle but chose to spare his life, a king who carried sorrow yet still strove to build a peaceful realm. Rhaegar Targaryen often heard these songs echoing through the corridors of the Red Keep, played by minstrels seeking his favor. He would pause to listen, a ghost of a smile on his lips, remembering the harps he had once played. He thought of the prophecy that had guided him, of the promise of a new dawn. He hoped this was the first step toward it, a realm no longer governed by fear, but by hope. And though darkness might loom beyond the wall, though tensions might still simmer among powerful lords, for now at least, Westeros had respite. One evening he stood on the balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, gazing out over the city. The setting sun lit the rooftops in warm gold, and the waters of Blackwater Bay shimmered. Elia stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Do you think this peace will last?" she asked softly. He considered the question, gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun sank into the sea. "I cannot say. The realm has many wounds, and men often cling to grudges like dragons hoarding gold. But I believe we have made a start. The rest is up to us, to rule with justice, to guard the realm from harm, and never to succumb to the darkness that consumed my father." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are not him," she whispered. Rhaegar closed his eyes, taking comfort in her warmth. "No," he said quietly. "I am not." Below them, the city's lamps began to flicker to life, twinkling like thousands of stars fallen to earth. Somewhere, beyond those walls, Robert Baratheon might be raising a cup of ale and muttering curses, or Ned Stark might be walking through Winterfell's godwood beneath ancient, snow-laden trees. Far to the south, Dorne's deserts glowed red in the twilight, and beyond the narrow sea, other mysteries unfolded that Westeros would one day face. But here in this moment there was a fragile and precious peace. Rhaegar felt the weight of the crown upon his head, both real and symbolic. He had dreamed of a song of ice and fire, of a unifying destiny that would reshape the world. Perhaps this was the beginning of that dream made flesh, not through conquest by sword and flame, but through mercy and understanding. In the months and years to come, many would debate whether Rhaegar Targaryen's reign was indeed the dawn of a new golden age or merely a calm before yet another storm. But on that evening, as the sun set over King's Landing, the city exhaled in relief. The small folk dared to hope, and a king stood watch over his realm with resolve in his heart. He was no perfect monarch. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of war, burdened by two loves, and shaped by a prophecy that might or might not ever come to pass. But he was also a man determined to chart a kinder path, to heal rather than harm, to unite instead of divide. And for a realm that had known far too much fire, the promise of peace was as welcome as a cool wind blowing in from the distant sea. Thus the 7 kingdoms moved forward, led by a king who chose mercy over vengeance, seeking to mend the wounds of a nation torn apart by rebellion and madness. In the annals of history, they would speak of King Rhaegar as the dragon who would not burn his people, the harpist king who valued songs and dreams, who offered the realm a chance, however fragile, at peaceful reform. And in the quiet hearts of men and women alike, there stirred a cautious faith that maybe, just maybe, they had turned from the brink of a nightmare toward the faint dawn of a better tomorrow. In the weeks that followed that sunset balcony moment, Rhaegar Targaryen gradually discovered that peace, however much yearned for, was no simple matter. The crown weighed heavier by the day, and though the immediate bloodshed had ceased, currents of resentment, ambition, and fear continued to swirl beneath the surface of the 7 kingdoms. He rose early each morning, often unable to sleep beyond dawn. His mind bristled with questions. How to secure trust without resorting to terror? How to hold lords in line when they had tasted rebellion? How to keep Robert Baratheon from sparking new strife? And on darker nights, he wondered if he had done right by choosing mercy over finality. He tackled the day-to-day business of governance surrounded by a cluster of advisors, many of whom were far from friendly with one another. Tywin Lannister, restored to his post as Hand of the King, glided about the court with uncanny efficiency, orchestrating the practical details of administration. The gold of Casterly Rock poured in, ensuring the capital's coffers would be replenished after the ravages of war. But Rhaegar never forgot the sharp intelligence behind Tywin's cool courtesy. If ever Tywin found a reason to doubt Rhaegar's hold on power, the lion would surely pounce. Yet for now they maintained an uneasy alliance, both too astute to allow simmering suspicion to unrave. The fragile realm. On the other side of the council table sat Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, representing Prince Doran of Dorne. Where Tywin's manner was cold and guarded, Oberyn's was often heated and direct, especially when the subject of restitution came up. He spoke openly of the loss Dorne had endured, the injuries done to Elia Martell's honor, and the rumor that King Aerys had once threatened to burn all of Sunspear if the Dornish dared oppose him. Rhaegar, though he understood Oberyn's fierce pride, walked a delicate line. He needed Dorne's cooperation, yet he could not yield too much lest other lords protest favoritism. So he brokered smaller measures, a promise of royal visits to Dorne, increased trade in spices and wines, and offer for Rhaenys to visit her Dornish kin while holding firm on matters of broad policy. The tension in Oberyn's voice softened at the mention of Rhaenys, whom he had once bounced on his knee. It was a slender thread of goodwill, but Rhaegar seized it. Between the lion and the viper sat other figures of note, Grand Maester Pycelle perpetually nodding in agreement with whichever lord happened to be speaking with the most authority, Lord Jon Connington, Rhaegar's friend, who had returned to the royal service with stoic devotion, and Ser Barristan Selmy, the stalwart Kingsguard whose presence offered a steadying influence. Barristan acted as a moral compass in a court that now found itself tasked with forging a new path, one of reformation. Whenever arguments grew too heated, a single quiet word from Ser Barristan would remind them of the sacrifices made during the rebellion, urging restraint. It was in these council sessions that Rhaegar refined his policy of what he called restorative governance. Rather than punish rebellious lords wholesale, he sought reconciliation. He offered local parliaments, small gatherings of knights and landed gentry, a chance to petition the crown directly about grievances. He commissioned a new code of laws designed to prevent future kings from invoking absolute authority to burn enemies alive or demand draconian penalties without cause. Maesters throughout Westeros were consulted to compile the legal traditions of each region, forging them into a unified code. It was a tedious, monumental undertaking, but Rhaegar believed it essential for lasting peace. Not all welcomed these sweeping changes. The older generation of High Lords grumbled that the Targaryen king was undermining their privileges. Some whispered that too much mercy hinted at a weak monarchy. Word drifted from distant castles that Lord Bolton in the north, though sworn to House Stark, sneered at the idea of papers and petitions, preferring more direct methods of control. There were rumors from the Iron Islands that Balon Greyjoy resented any southern meddling, especially a code of laws that restricted pillage at sea. Rhaegar knew such pockets of opposition would not vanish overnight. Still, he pushed on, systematically meeting with lords, sending envoys, and writing personal letters that sought to calm and reassure. In the midst of these labors, the personal realm of King Rhaegar grew no less complicated. Elia Martell, though outwardly graceful and supportive, could not entirely disguise the flickers of hurt in her eyes. On nights when they dined together in the solar, she sometimes traced a fingertip across the rim of her wine cup, asking in hushed tones about Lyanna Stark's whereabouts. Rhaegar answered truthfully that Lyanna was at Winterfell with her family, that she was safe, that she was still uncertain of her future. Elia never spoke harshly of Lyanna, but the questions weighed on her. She was well aware that Rhaegar's bond with the northern girl had sparked a war that nearly consumed the realm. Elia's own children, Rhaenys and Aegon, continued to flourish. Rhaenys was old enough now to read history scrolls and would pester her father with endless questions about the age of heroes and the conquest. Little Aegon spent his days exploring the courtyards, a miniature sword in hand, chasing after page boys or toddling around behind the king guard. Rhaegar often found himself pausing in the middle of some grand meeting to wonder at the strangeness of it all. He had dethroned his father, faced Robert Baratheon's fury, restructured half the realm. And yet when he saw Aegon's bright smile or heard Rhaenys sing a song in a high, childish voice, he felt the tug of fatherhood above every other duty. He saw in them the hope for a better future, for a generation unscarred by fire and blood. Robert Baratheon, meanwhile, had returned to Storm's End, but the reports from that quarter were grim. Jon Connington, riding through the Stormlands on a royal progress, observed that Robert drank heavily, openly cursed that damned dragon, and hammered at a training dummy each morning as if imagining it was Rhaegar's face. Men said Robert was lonely, refusing to take a bride, souring feasts with dark moods. However, Storm's End was not in revolt and its taxes were paid on time. For now, Robert obeyed the letter of his oath. Still, Rhaegar worried that Robert's hatred would one day spark anew. At times, Ned Stark corresponded quietly with the king, bridging the gap left by Robert's anger. Ned wrote of life in the north, how the snows had come early this year, how the harvest had been meager but enough to sustain them, how Lady Catelyn Tully, his new wife, brought warmth to Winterfell with her courtesy and devotion. He also wrote that Lyanna remained restless, divided between her love for her home and some unspoken longing. Ned hinted that she had confided in him about Rhaegar, about regrets and what-ifs, but she never pressed Ned to intervene. She seemed content to walk in Winterfell's Godswood, quiet under the heart tree, her future uncertain. One day, a year after the war's end, a raven arrived bearing the Stark sigil. Rhaegar unfurled the letter in the solitude of his private solar, scanning Ned's words. "My sister will travel south to visit the royal court, to see old friends and speak with you regarding matters she has left unresolved. She comes of her own free will, accompanied only by a small retinue of trusted guards. I trust you will receive her kindly, as you once vowed." Rhaegar read those lines 3 times, a swirl of hope and trepidation coiling within him. He set down the letter, pressing a hand to his brow. He recalled Lyanna's face when they parted, how her eyes gleamed with the same northern steel that made her captivating from the start. He recalled the nights at Harrenhal, the moment in the Godswood when the wind had whispered secrets among the weirwoods. Would her return reopen old wounds or help them heal? He could not say, but he resolved to greet her with openness, mindful of Elia's feelings, aware of the court's watchful gaze. News of Lyanna Stark's return would ripple through every corridor in the Red Keep. When at last the day came, Rhaegar stood on the walls overlooking the city gate. Lyanna Stark arrived in the early afternoon, just as the winter sun began to sink toward the western horizon. The small party of Northmen, gray cloaks, lean horses, rode with quiet dignity through the winding streets. Small folk paused to stare, some recognizing the Wolf Maid, whose abduction had once been rumored to spark the war. Others saw only a noble lady of House Stark, come to treat with the new king. Lyanna herself rode at the head, straight-backed, her long hair braided back from her face, her gaze fixed forward. Inside the Red Keep's courtyard, stable hands rushed to take the horses. Rhaegar descended the steps alongside Elia Martell, who had insisted on accompanying him. The hush was palpable as Lyanna dismounted. For a moment, the two women regarded each other across the flags of the yard. Elia, slender, dark-haired, wearing a gown of deep blue and gold. Lyanna, taller, more wind-burned, dressed simply in a traveling cloak, her eyes reflecting both caution and curiosity. Elia offered a small, polite bow. "Lady Stark, welcome to King's Landing." Lyanna inclined her head. "Princess Elia." Then she looked at Rhaegar. "Your Grace." The weight of all that had happened pressed down on him. He yearned to say her name, to reach out, but he knew the courtyard was crowded with courtiers, guards, and onlookers. Instead, he stepped forward. "Lady Stark, I am glad you came. I trust your journey was safe." Her voice held a quiet edge. "Safe enough. The roads south are still uneasy, but we encountered no trouble." She glanced around, noting the Lannister guards in their crimson cloaks, the Targaryen banners rippling overhead. Times have certainly changed. Rhaegar guided her inside, with Elia at his side. The three of them, an uneasy triangle, walked through the stone passages toward the solar the king had prepared. A hush followed in their wake. Even the pages and stewards seemed to sense that this was no ordinary visit. Once inside the small but richly furnished chamber, the doors were shut, leaving them alone. Lyanna removed her cloak, brushed dust from her sleeves, and took in the surroundings. Elia gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Would you like refreshments? We have mulled wine, or perhaps honeyed water if you prefer." Lyanna paused. "Mulled wine would be nice." She cast a glance at the tapestries on the wall. Scenes of Targaryen triumph from the days of Aegon's conquest. Dragons soared over fields of fire. A subtle tension rippled through her. She had always been fascinated by grand stories, but she also knew how savage they could be in truth. Rhaegar spoke gently. "Lyanna, I have not forgotten my pledge to you. You are free to come and go as you will. If at any point you feel uncomfortable." She shook her head. "That's not why I'm here. I came to speak openly about everything. The realm has changed, and I have changed too. I won't pretend we can wipe away the pain of the war, but I need to know what place I have in this new order, if any." Elia poured the wine herself, pushing the goblet across a small table to Lyanna. "You are a highborn lady of House Stark. That alone secures you a place in these kingdoms, should you desire it. But I know there is more to this than titles." Lyanna accepted the goblet, studying Elia's face. "I do not wish to cause strife between you," she said candidly. "I know how delicate your situation is, Elia. I know this war was blamed on my abduction or my running away or whatever the realm chooses to call it now. Much of that blame was unfairly thrust upon you as if you were overshadowed or cast aside. I never meant for that to happen." Elia's posture stiffened. She took a breath. "I have chosen to stand by Rhaegar. I understand that he cares for you deeply. But I am his wife and the mother of his children. We cannot ignore custom nor the realm's expectation that the king and queen present a united front." Lyanna nodded, her lips pressed thin. "I understand. And I have no desire to be the cause of further scandal. In Winterfell, I had time to reflect on the war, on the choices made. What I feel for Rhaegar," she hesitated, glancing at him. "It's complicated. It's something I cannot simply dismiss. But I also cannot tear apart a marriage that stands at the heart of the realm." A tense silence followed. Rhaegar looked between them. In truth, he had long dreamed of a realm that might accept his bond with both women, an echo of Targaryen polygamy from centuries past. Yet he knew that even whispering such a notion would ignite fresh outrage. He could see the lines of strain in Elia's face, the flicker of conflict in Lyanna's eyes. Would forcing them into some arrangement truly serve anyone? Finally, Elia set down her goblet. Lyanna, I have no wish to keep you from the king's presence if you find comfort in his counsel. But let us be plain. I cannot consent to share my husband in a formal sense. The realm would not accept it, and I do not think I could bear it. Our history of polygamy is long past. Any attempt to revive it would be disastrous. Lyanna's eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and sadness. Nor would I press for that. I came here because I did not want the ghost of our feelings to hang over the realm, stirring rumors of a second rebellion or of a Stark queen. I will not undermine you, Elia. She paused, then spoke quietly. Whatever passes between Rhaegar and me must remain a private sorrow, an unfulfilled dream. The prophecy he once spoke of. I do not know if it was meant to end in war and heartbreak. Perhaps the gods simply led us astray. Rhaegar felt his throat tighten. He had believed so strongly in the Song of Ice and Fire, believed that Lyanna's lineage of northern ice and his Targaryen fire would herald something greater. But the cost had been almost unbearable. His father's madness, the devastation across the realm, the dead littering the fields, was that truly the path the gods intended? He spoke at last. Lyanna, Elia, it is not my place to demand more than you can give. I will respect your wishes. I ask only that we might find a way to remain allies, to support one another in healing the realm. We have all lost much. Maybe together we can rebuild. Lyanna looked at him with an aching tenderness that she quickly masked. She reached out and clasped Elia's hand, surprising the Dornish princess. I will do my part to see that House Stark stands by your family. My brother Ned has already pledged to serve the king, and I stand by Ned. Let no rumor say I came here to sow discord. Elia's voice wavered. Then we are in agreement. They sat there a while longer, the tension slowly receding into quiet acceptance. Though the three of them would never share a simple friendship, there was at least a resolution that might allow the realm to breathe easier. Lyanna had come not to seize a crown or demand a place at Rhaegar's side, but to close a chapter that had nearly torn the world apart. Elia, in turn, showed a dignity that only underscored her inherent grace. Rhaegar could not fully quell his longing nor forget the prophecy that still haunted him. But he understood that if the realm were to know real peace, some dreams must be set aside. Over the next week, Lyanna settled into guest quarters in the Red Keep. She moved about the castle with a certain calm detachment, greeting old acquaintances and forging new ones. Some among the royal court were startled by her presence. An open invitation from the king, when she had once been at the heart of the war, but any attempt at gossip was met with Rhaegar's steady disapproval. He ordered that she be treated as an honored guest of the crown, ensuring courtesy wherever she went. One afternoon, Lyanna strolled through the castle gardens, where she found Rhaenys practicing a Dornish dance with her septa. The little girl's face lit up at the newcomer, and she dashed over to greet Lyanna with wide-eyed curiosity. Lyanna knelt, smiling, and introduced herself as an old friend of her father's. Rhaenys, who had heard many rumors whispered by the ladies of the court, merely curtsied in an attempt at grown-up grace. Watching from a balcony above, Elia felt a subtle ache in her chest, wondering what might have been if the realm had not been scarred by hatred and tragedy. Later that evening, Lyanna dined with Ned Stark, who had arrived to escort her home when her business was concluded. Rhaegar joined them at the high table along with Elia, Tywin, and other courtiers. The conversation was guarded but polite. Ned inquired after the new laws Rhaegar was drafting, and Rhaegar explained how he hoped to unify legal customs across the kingdoms. Tywin occasionally interjected with practical considerations, tax revenues, enforcement, the reluctance of certain lords to cede local authority. Ned listened intently, evidently impressed by the king's resolve. Yet, just as the meal drew to a close, a messenger burst into the hall, out of breath and pale as snow. Bowing low before the dais, the man gasped, "Your Grace, urgent news. A rebellion in the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy has declared himself king of the Isles, spurning the crown." A hush fell. Rhaegar slowly set down his wine cup. Tywin, lips pressed thin, asked the messenger for details. The man relayed what little he knew. Raiding ships had been sighted off the coast of the Westerlands, and ravens from the north reported that the Ironborn were gathering longships. Balon Greyjoy had apparently crowned himself in the ancient tradition of the Iron Isles, rejecting the rule of any Targaryen. Rhaegar's stomach tightened. The realm had barely recovered from one war. Now, the Ironborn threatened the fragile peace. He exchanged a glance with Tywin. He saw a glitter of opportunism in the lion's eyes. To crush the Iron Islands would unify the realm behind Rhaegar, but a war might also bleed the crown's coffers dry. They would have to act carefully. He glanced around the table, seeing a range of reactions. Oberyn Martell's lip curled in contempt for the Ironborn. Ned Stark's face darkened with concern. Alya's eyes flickered with worry. Lyanna, for her part, stared at the messenger, her expression neutral as though bracing herself for yet another conflict. Rhaegar stood from his chair. Summon the small council at once. We will hear what must be done. Lord Stark, I invite you to join us, as your perspective on the North will be invaluable. Lady Stark, he added gently, you need not attend if you prefer to rest. But Lyanna rose as well. I may not be a great lord, your grace, but I would hear what is planned. I am no stranger to matters of war. Rhaegar inclined his head, acknowledging the steel in her. Very well. And the entire table dispersed in an anxious flurry, leaving the half-eaten feast behind. Within the hour, the king's solar was filled with the murmur of hushed voices. Tywin had brought a map of Westeros, unrolling it across a large table. Ned stood on one side, arms folded, while Oberyn leaned over the other side, pointing to the coastlines. Lords from nearby seats milled in the background, including a representative of House Harlaw who looked thoroughly uneasy about Balon Greyjoy's claims. Tywin began. The Ironborn rely on swift, devastating raids. Their coasts are difficult to blockade due to reefs and treacherous waters. If Balon has crowned himself, he'll want to prove his power quickly, likely by striking valuable targets, perhaps Lannisport or the Shield Islands. Oberyn brushed a finger along the southwestern coasts. They might even sail around the Reach and harass Dorne, though that's a longer route. More likely, they'll test the west first as a direct challenge to the hand of the king. Ned studied the map. What about the north? The Iron Islands have historically raided the northern coasts and the Stony Shore. If Balon wants to send a message that none of the Seven Kingdoms can hold him, he may hit multiple fronts. Rhaegar listened, considering each viewpoint. I will not allow the Ironborn to terrorize the realm, he said firmly. But I also want to avoid an all-out war if possible. We should attempt negotiation first. Balon Greyjoy has made a claim that does not mean he has the full support of his lord's bannermen. Some Ironborn may not wish to break from the crown, especially if they realize we can retaliate. Tywin's eyes narrowed. Mercy again, your grace? The Ironborn respect only strength. If we show leniency, they will see it as weakness. Rhaegar caught the faint echo of an old argument that his mercy toward Robert Baratheon had made him appear soft. But he held Tywin's gaze. Strength is not measured by how quickly one reaches for the sword, Lord Tywin. We will send an envoy to Pike with a final offer, bend the knee, retract any claim to kingship, and the Iron Islands shall retain the rights they have always had. If Balon refuses, we will act. Ned nodded in agreement. A letter from the king, perhaps carried by an Ironborn lord still loyal. That might buy time to prepare our fleets. If we must fight, we want the advantage of readiness. Tywin exhaled. Very well. We will prepare a fleet of our own, station it at Fair Isle, and gather forces in the Westerlands to repel any raids. The Redwine fleet from the Arbor can be summoned if we need more ships. But I advise not to delay too long. Every day the Ironborn sail unopposed is a day they can plunder the coastline and incite others to join them. So it was decided. A raven would be sent at dawn to the Iron Isles, bearing the king's seal. If Balon persisted in his rebellion, the crown would respond with force. The meeting adjourned, leaving a heavy tension in the air. Many lords lingered to discuss strategy in low voices, stepping out onto the torchlit corridors. Rhaegar found himself alone for a moment with Lyanna and Ned as the others drifted away. The siblings exchanged a glance before Ned cleared his throat. Your Grace, if this war unfolds, the North will honor its oaths to the crown. But our banners are spread thin after the rebellion. We need time to muster them. Rhaegar set a hand on Ned's shoulder, a gesture of informal respect. I appreciate your loyalty, Lord Stark. I hope it does not come to war. But if it does, your contribution will be noted. Lyanna spoke quietly. I have heard the tales of Ironborn raids since I was a child. They love battle, or at least they love the plunder that comes with it. It won't be easy to bring them to heel. Rhaegar gave a resigned nod. No, but we must try. Too much innocent blood was spilled in the last war. I won't stand aside and let another wave of chaos sweep through. As they parted ways in the corridor, Ned escorted Lyanna back to her chambers, leaving Rhaegar to pace alone for a time. He paused at a high window looking out over King's Landing, the flicker of countless lanterns dancing below. Was the realm truly doomed to keep bleeding from one corner or another? The Iron Islands were too remote, too isolated in culture, and the memories of their old way of life, thralls, the old way, reaving, remained potent. Had his father's brutality, or even Aegon the Conqueror's centuries ago, ever truly changed them? Late that night, unable to rest, Rhaegar went to check on his father. The Mad King had been confined to a suite of rooms in Maegor's Holdfast, guarded by the King's Guard. Aerys's mania had grown more subdued in the months since his removal, though he still lapsed into fits of paranoid rage. Grand Maester Pycelle administered potions to keep him calm, but Aerys's mind wandered realms far from reason. The guards let Rhaegar pass without question. Inside, the once magnificent king lay in a bed stacked with pillows, his hair a matted shock of white, his eyes hollow. He looked up at Rhaegar, blinking in confusion. "You, boy, where have you been? They're all traitors, you know. Every one of them wants my throne." Rhaegar exhaled, stepping to the bedside. "I am the king now, father. You are here for your own protection." He repeated the words he'd said many times. "No one will hurt you." Aerys laughed weakly, a rasping sound. "But I will hurt them. Burn them all. That's what I should have done. The flames, boy. They speak to me, they tell me." He dissolved into incoherent muttering. Rhaegar looked at him, heartsick with pity. Aerys Targaryen had once been a handsome, vibrant king, brimming with ambition. Over the years, fear and paranoia had eaten his mind from within, leaving this husk who raved about fire. He was the living embodiment of the dangers of unbridled tyranny and of the madness that could lurk in Targaryen blood. Rhaegar gently placed a hand on Aerys's thin shoulder. "Rest, father," he murmured. "The realm is in better hands now." Aerys's response was a sigh or perhaps a faint laugh. Rhaegar left him to the quiet darkness, a swirl of sorrow in his chest. He wondered if his father could even comprehend how close the kingdom had come to ruin and how precariously it still balanced on the edge of war. Early the next morning, a raven was sent to Pike, bearing the king's demands: surrender your false crown, reaffirm loyalty to House Targaryen, and you shall retain your titles. Otherwise, the might of the realm will descend upon you. The letter was addressed personally to Balon Greyjoy, concluding with Rhaegar's regal signature. To increase its chances of acceptance, Rhaegar allowed Lord Botley, an Ironborn lord known to oppose Balon, to carry it in person. Botley departed with a small escort by ship from King's Landing, hoping that Balon would at least listen to a man of his own islands. In the days that followed, the city braced for news. Tensions ran high. Merchants whispered of raising prices to stockpile supplies, fearing a naval blockade or renewed war. Gold cloaks patrolled the port in force to quell any unrest. Tywin busied himself with war preparations despite Rhaegar's hope for a peaceful resolution, gathering crossbowmen, forging alliances, writing to the Redwynes about mobilizing their famed fleet. Meanwhile, Ned Stark lingered in the capital, not wanting to depart until Lyanna was ready and no doubt waiting to see if the realm would erupt in conflict once more. At last, news arrived in the form of a battered ship limping into Blackwater Bay. Lord Botley emerged, bloodied from a wound in his side, with only half his escort remaining. He was carried to the Red Keep's audience hall, where he collapsed at the foot of the throne. Rhaegar descended to kneel by his side, calling for the Grand Maester at once. Botley's words came in pained gasps. Balon refused, tore the scroll to pieces, had me beaten, said the iron price would be paid. Then he coughed up blood, eyes rolling. He claims the sea belongs to the Ironborn alone. Raiders have already burned harbors in the Westerlands. Rhaegar felt a chill grip him. Grand Maester Pycelle rushed forward, trying to staunch Botley's wound, but the man's breathing rattled. "Your Grace, I served you as best I could." "I'm sorry." His eyes glazed over, and with a final shudder, he went still. Anger surged through Rhaegar, tempered by sorrow. That Balon would answer a diplomatic envoy with violence and murder only underscored his utter rejection of the crown. Rhaegar rose slowly, fists clenched. Lord Botley had been a loyal messenger, and his blood now stained the marble floor. Another war threatened to spill across Westeros, and the uneasy calm that Rhaegar had so carefully nurtured was unraveling. Tywin approached from the side, voice cold. "You see, Your Grace? Mercy gained us nothing. Balon Greyjoy spat on your offer, and now he has begun his pillaging. We must strike fast and hard." Around them, courtiers muttered in agreement, faces taut with apprehension. War had come again. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, remembering how many had died at the Trident, how many houses had been torn apart by the last rebellion. Yet what choice remained? Balon had declared open hostility, had declared himself a king. If Rhaegar did nothing, the realm would see him as weak. Worse, the Ironborn would ravage coast after coast. He opened his eyes, stepping around Botley's lifeless body. "Summon the council," he ordered. "We prepare for war." Though his voice was calm, he felt a deep sadness coursing beneath the resolve. Within days, the 7 kingdoms began to mobilize. Ravens flew to the major houses, calling upon them to gather arms. The royal fleet, bolstered by ships from Dragonstone, the Crownlands, and newly promised vessels from House Redwine, converged on the waters near Fair Isle to contain the Ironborn. Tywin Lannister organized ground forces in the Westerlands, determined to protect Lannisport and the coastline from Reaving. Rhaegar coordinated with the Reach, ensuring that the Shield Islands had additional garrisons. Ned Stark, seeing that conflict was inevitable, offered the North's support. "Though it may take time to muster, my lords, we stand ready, your grace," he said in a formal audience. Beside him, Lyanna looked troubled. "I will see to it that we guard the northern coast should the Ironborn attempt to strike Bear Island or the Rills." Rhaegar nodded. "Your presence here has been invaluable, Lord Stark, but I understand if you must depart. The North needs your leadership." Ned hesitated, glancing at Lyanna. "My sister has business here still, or so she says, but I should return to Winterfell soon, if only to oversee the raising of our banners. Rest assured, the North will not fail the crown in its hour of need." Lyanna lifted her chin. "I will travel back when the time is right, but for now, I want to offer what help I can, even if that means only speaking with the other lords or assisting in the infirmary. I've seen enough war to know every effort matters." So Ned departed, leaving Lyanna behind, and the capital buzzed with war preparations. Blacksmiths hammered out fresh arms and armor. Carters hauled supplies to the docks, and the Red Keep's courtyard filled daily with soldiers waiting to be assigned. The king's banners were readied, the 3-headed dragon to fly over the fleet, sending a clear message to Balon Greyjoy that he was about to face the unified might of the realm. Before setting sail with the fleet, Rhaegar spent a quiet night with his family. Elia tried to hide her worry for him, though her hands trembled slightly as she helped him pack his traveling trunk. Rhaenys clung to him, tears in her eyes. "Papa, you'll come back soon, won't you? You won't go away forever?" He scooped her into a hug, pressing his cheek to her soft hair. "I will come back, my sweet girl. I promise." Aegon, too young to fully grasp the danger, gurgled happily when Rhaegar kissed his forehead. Still, Rhaegar's heart felt weighed down by the possibility that, like so many fathers who rode to war, he might not return. The memories of that final clash at the Trident haunted him. War never followed a script. One misstep and a life could end. Elia walked him to the courtyard where the royal guard awaited. She kissed him goodbye, whispering, "Come back to us. The realm needs you, but we need you more." He gave her a faint smile, touched her cheek in silent promise. Then he mounted his white stallion and led the column out of the Red Keep amid the thunder of hooves and the clatter of arms. They rendezvoused at the port where ships bobbed in the harbor under the watchful eyes of gold cloaks. Rhaegar boarded the royal flagship, a stout vessel with black sails emblazoned with the Targaryen sigil. On the prow, a carved dragon figurehead stretched its wings. The seer tasted of salt, carrying the promise of both freedom and peril. As the anchors were raised, the deck bustled with marines, archers, and knights in polished breastplates. War banners snapped overhead in the brisk wind. Townsfolk and merchants watched from the docks as the great ships rode out, sails unfurled to catch the breeze. The Armada's departure was a spectacle, flags streaming in the bright sunlight, the pounding of war drums echoing across Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar stood on the forecastle, hands clasped behind him, silver hair blowing in the wind, eyes fixed westward. He thought of the men and women in the villages that might be sacked if they failed. He remembered the vow he had made to rule justly, to keep the peace. Now he found himself leading a second war in as many years, though this time it was not to depose a Mad Anne, but to preserve the kingdom from yet another break in unity. As the royal fleet made for Fair Isle, they encountered the first signs of Ironborn aggression. Fishing vessels limped by, scorched or riddled with arrows, their crews telling tales of longships that appeared in the morning mists, plundering and burning. Refugees crowded the deck of every battered ship, wide-eyed and hungry. Rhaegar took them aboard, offered them food and safety, even as his knights cursed the cruelty of the Ironborn. He had never seen Balon Greyjoy's face, but he imagined a man cold as stone, unyielding as the crags of pike. Rhaegar's pity for the Ironborn's hard life did not temper his resolve to end their terrorizing ways. When at last they reached Fair Isle, Rhaegar found Tywin Lannister already encamped on the shore with a contingent of soldiers. By land, Tywin had marched from the Westerlands, securing the coastline where Ironborn raiders might land. War tents dotted the beaches, and the Lannister banner, a roaring golden lion, flew beside the dragon of Targaryen. The combined forces, each wary of the other's pride, made a show of unity. Soldiers sharpened swords, drew up lines of defense, prepared siege engines in case they needed to assault the Iron Islands themselves. The tension in the air was as thick as pitch. Tywin greeted Rhaegar with a curt bow at the edge of the encampment. "We've had skirmishes along the coast. Small longships trying to raid, but they fled when they saw our numbers. Still, we can't simply defend. Balon will continue to strike weaker targets elsewhere." Rhaegar gazed over the restless waves. The Iron Islands lay further north and west, across a swath of cold ocean. "We should draw them out, or else sail directly to Pike. But the Iron Islands are heavily fortified, and an outright invasion could cost thousands of lives. Let's see if we can break their main raiding fleet in open water first." Tywin nodded, though his expression suggested impatience. "We have enough ships to outnumber them, especially once the Red Wines arrive. Still, the Ironborn are fearsome sailors. They'll look for storms or hidden coves to slip away." Over the following weeks, the royal fleet patrolled the western seas, aided by local lords with smaller ships. They thwarted several raids, capturing or sinking Ironborn longships. Captured reavers spat insults in their guttural accents, proclaiming that Balon was the rightful king of salt and rock. Rhaegar tried to glean intelligence from them, but they were tight-lipped or simply ignorant of the larger plan. Meanwhile, Tywin's forces secured the coast, preventing the Ironborn from striking Lannisport or Case. During this slow, grinding campaign, ravens brought word from other fronts. Euron Greyjoy, Balon's brother, was rumored to be sailing beyond the Stepstones in search of mercenaries and exotic weapons. Victarion Greyjoy led some of the most devastating raids, while Balon himself remained ensconced on Pike, sending out messages that the old way had returned, that the Ironborn would pay the iron price for their freedom. Rhaegar found it maddening that Balon would risk his entire people in a war that they could not realistically win. But pride, Rhaegar knew, could be as potent a madness as any. And so, as the year turned, Rhaegar Targaryen was consumed by yet another war. This time a naval struggle that demanded both cunning and perseverance. Gone were the grand charges of cavalry on wide fields like the Trident. Here, battles took place on deck amid spray and blood, or in fierce skirmishes along rocky beaches. Word reached him that men were dying on both sides, though in far smaller numbers than the land battles of the rebellion. But each death chipped away at the fragile sense of peace he had tried so hard to build. At one point, after a minor clash near the arbor, Rhaegar found himself aboard a captured Ironborn vessel. The air stank of brine and tar. A half-dead raider lay slumped against the mast, his arm severed at the elbow. Rhaegar knelt beside him, ordering the royal maester to tend the wound. The man hissed through clenched teeth, "Why bother, Dragon King? Let me die. Ironborn do not fear death." Rhaegar's eyes flicked over him. "I do not wish to rule over corpses. If you yield, you live. That's the law." The raider spat blood. "We yield to no one. This war is only the beginning. We'll keep coming. Balon, he'll never bend." Rhaegar felt a numbness spreading in his chest. "Then more will die, and your people will suffer. Is that worth it?" But the man only gave a defiant grin, licking his split lip. "What do you know of worth? We pay the iron price. You Southerners pay gold and call yourselves conquerors. The sea is ours." He succumbed soon after, his breath rattling away in the gull-haunted silence. Rhaegar stood, turning to the maester with a weary sigh. "Burn the dead. Put the wounded in the infirmary. We press on." Months slipped by. The war never reached the cataclysmic scale of Robert's rebellion, for the Ironborn were too few to challenge the entire realm head-on. Instead, it dragged, marked by raids and ambushes. The cost was measured in burnt villages, lost ships, drowned sailors. Rhaegar's patience began to erode. Tywin urged a direct invasion, storming the Iron Islands themselves. But to do so would require a massive undertaking, troops, ships, siege weapons, all directed at a chain of rocky, storm-lashed isles. Eventually, news came that Ned Stark had mobilized a northern fleet at White Harbor, intending to sail around the Cape and strike the Iron Islands from the north. The plan was for the Northmen to converge with the royal fleet, trapping the Ironborn between two fronts. Rhaegar saw promise in this. If they squeezed Pike from both sides, perhaps Balon would be forced to surrender. Yet the weather turned foul that season. Storms battered the coastline, scattering ships, forcing the Northmen to wait out the worst of the squalls. The entire campaign slowed to a miserable crawl. In King's Landing, Elia Martell continued to oversee the Regency Council in Rhaegar's absence, maintaining order in the capital. She wrote letters to him, sometimes describing new developments in the city. How Lyanna had used her time to assist the city's orphans and set up a small charity, how the faith had praised the king's commitment to justice, how some of the lords whispered dissatisfaction with a prolonged war that yielded no definitive victory. Each letter reminded Rhaegar that even while he waged war at sea, his responsibilities as king loomed ever-present. At last, a new opportunity emerged. Scouts reported that the bulk of the Ironborn fleet had gathered near the waters around Great White, the largest of the islands, likely to resupply. If the royal fleet could catch them there, they might destroy or capture enough ships to break Balan's power. Rhaegar convened his admirals, among them Lord Redwine, who had joined with a large contingent of Arbor ships, and Lord Celtigar from Claw Isle to plan the assault. They decided that under cover of darkness they would sail for Great White, risk the reefs, and strike at dawn. The night before the attack, Rhaegar found it difficult to sleep. He stood at the prow of his flagship, the wind tugging his cloak. Starlight glinted on the waves, and a waning moon cast a milky glow on the rolling sea. He listened to the faint murmur of sailors, the creaking of rigging, the distant hiss of water against hulls. A memory rose unbidden. Standing on the Trident's bank, sword in hand, staring down Robert Baratheon. A decisive blow had ended that conflict. He wondered if tomorrow might bring a similarly decisive moment, perhaps in the form of a vicious sea battle that would either break the Ironborn or scatter the royal fleet. A voice startled him from behind. It was Ser Barristan Selmy, who had accompanied him. The old knight wore a somber expression. "Your Grace, you should rest. Dawn comes soon." Rhaegar turned, grateful for the company of his Kingsguard. "I can't sleep. Too many thoughts." Barristan hesitated, then spoke softly. "We do what we must for the realm. I remember how your father once tried to crush the Iron Islands with fire and fear. Perhaps if he had used reason and smaller measures, they might never have rebelled now. We cannot know." Rhaegar let out a slow breath. "Balan sees himself as a king. His pride won't allow him to kneel. I tried mercy," he answered with blood. "And here we are again." Barristan placed a steady hand on Rhaegar's shoulder. "You are not your father. Whatever tomorrow brings, you have upheld your principles. No one can doubt that, not even the Ironborn." The thought offered small solace, but Rhaegar nodded. He squeezed Barristan's hand in silent thanks, then turned once more to the starlit horizon. In the darkness, Great White's craggy shores lay somewhere beyond the cresting waves. Tomorrow he would face the Ironborn with steel and fire if words could not suffice. When dawn broke, it came wrapped in swirling mist. The sails of the royal fleet were damp with dew, the men shivering in the early chill. Drums signaled the approach toward the island's bay, where scouts reported the Ironborn had anchored for the night. Rowers dipped oars carefully, trying to keep as quiet as possible. Slowly, shapes emerged in the mist, the silhouettes of enemy longships rocking at anchor near the shore. Rhaegar stood on the quarterdeck, heart pounding. His admirals had distributed the fleet into 3 squadrons, each poised to encircle the enemy ships. Archers waited at the rails, arrow tips wrapped in oil-soaked rags. Soldiers knelt behind bulwarks, swords drawn. The tension was like a drawn bowstring. Suddenly, a shout echoed across the water. An Ironborn lookout had spotted them. Horns blared, raw and brassy, rousing the longships. Figures scrambled on decks, hoisting sails, cutting anchors, preparing for a fight. Rhaegar raised his arm, and the signal drums thundered. Charge! In an explosion of sound, the royal fleet surged forward. War horns, drum beats, and the crash of oars churned the bay. Ironborn archers loosed arrows from their decks, some flaming, streaking through the pale mist. Rhaegar's archers answered with volleys of their own. Soon, the whir of arrows and the crackle of flames merged with battle cries. The water erupted in a frenzy of ships ramming, grappling, boarding. Rhaegar's flagship, flanked by 2 Arbor galleys, drove straight at the cluster of Ironborn warships. One of them, a hulking vessel with a kraken sigil, pivoted to meet them, men roaring defiance. With a terrible crunch, the hulls collided. Grapnels flew, chains rattled, and sailors screamed as they leaped across. Rhaegar drew his sword, leading the charge onto the Ironborn deck, Barristan Selmy at his side. The fight was brutal and close. Ironborn reavers were fearsome in melee, hacking with axes, slamming with shields. Rhaegar's men responded with disciplined sword work, many wearing heavier armor. Blood slicked the deck, and the tang of salt and iron filled the air. Rhaegar parried a savage axe blow, spinning to slash across a raider's abdomen. Barristan cut down 2 more, moving with the lethal grace of a man who had survived 100 battles. Elsewhere across the bay, the clash continued. Ships burned, sending black smoke curling into the morning sky. Men fell into the sea, thrashing as the cold water claimed them. Arrows whistled overhead, sometimes finding purchase in rigging or flesh. The thunder of war drums mixed with the roar of waves. Every so often, the mist parted to reveal a glimpse of another part of the battle, a red wine galley ramming an Ironborn vessel or a cluster of longships cornered by a group of Westland carracks. Step by bloody step, the royal forces began to overwhelm the Ironborn. Many of the longships, unprepared for a large-scale assault, found themselves trapped in the bay. One by one, they either struck their colors or were boarded and taken by force. Some tried to flee toward open sea, but the royal galleys blocked their escape, forcing them onto the rocks or capturing them. Rhaegar fought until his arms ached, until his breath came ragged. By mid-morning, a crescendo of cheers went up as Ironborn survivors knelt in chains on their decks or else drifted dead in the water. When the smoke cleared, the scale of the victory became apparent. Hundreds of Ironborn reavers were prisoners, their ships confiscated or sunk. The cost to the royal fleet was not small, many ships burned, many men lay wounded or dead. But the blow to Balon Greyjoy's naval power was devastating. If his main fleet was crushed at Great White, he would struggle to mount raids. Yet even in victory, the war was not finished. Balon himself was not among the captives. Word spread that he remained on Pike with a smaller reserve. The question now was whether to press the advantage and invade the island's strongholds or wait for Balon's next move. Tywin, once he arrived with ground forces, pressed for an immediate assault on Pike to bring that treacherous fool to heel. Rhaegar weighed the risks. An amphibious invasion against fortress cliffs was dangerous, but Balon's main strength was presumably shattered. As the battered fleet regrouped, Rhaegar walked the deck of his flagship, stepping around the bodies of friend and foe alike. Blood pooled in scuppers and the stench of burned wood and flesh lingered. He felt a surge of grief for the men who had followed him and perished in this savage dawn battle. Moments like these reminded him again of the cost of kingship, the necessity to spill blood, however unwillingly, in the name of peace. He found Barristan leaning against the railing, helmet off, face streaked with soot. The old knight gave him a weary nod. "A great victory, your grace. The Ironborn are broken here." Rhaegar's lips twisted in a grimace. Broken, but not beaten. Balon still sits on Pike, uncowed. Barristan's gaze flicked across the water where the red wine ships were helping rescue survivors from the sea. "Word from the Arbor, they mean to stay and help if you order an invasion. Tywin will press to strike while we can. But we follow your lead." Rhaegar looked toward the horizon. "I want to offer Balon one last chance to surrender. Let him see what happened here. Let him know we have no fear of a direct assault. Perhaps we can spare more bloodshed." Barristan hesitated, looking conflicted. "As you will, your grace. But if he refuses again..." Rhaegar closed his eyes, feeling the weariness settle in his bones. "Then we finish what we started." A fresh raven was dispatched to Pike, bearing news of the Ironborn defeat at Great White and demanding Balon's surrender. A few days passed with no reply. Patrols scoured the seas around Pike, capturing a handful of stragglers. Interrogations revealed that Balon was furious, raving about the old way, swearing never to yield. The fortress of Pike stood atop towering stone stacks lashed by the sea, connected by swaying bridges. An assault would be treacherous, but with the Ironborn fleet destroyed, Balon's isolation was near total. Tywin arrived with his men soon after, disembarking on the stony beaches of Great White to join Rhaegar's command. Standing amidst the cinders of the former Ironborn anchorage, Tywin surveyed the battered remains. "It's time," he said curtly. "We sail to Pike, land an army, and take the castle by storm. Balon Greyjoy must be made an example. Hang him, flay him, whatever punishment your grace deems fit. But no realm can endure if every petty lord who fancies himself a king is coddled." Rhaegar's jaw tightened. He thought of the storm-lashed fortress, of the Ironborn who might fight to the last drop of blood. "We will proceed. I only pray that Balon sees reason." Tywin's cold laugh suggested he had no such illusions. In the gray dawn, the combined forces set sail for Pike. The sea was rough, swells heaving the ships. As the fortress came into view, a grim outline perched on jagged stacks, Rhaegar felt a sense of fateful finality. The time for negotiation was over. Dozens of longships rotted in anchorages around the other islands or had been scuttled, while the handful that Balon retained were outnumbered and outmatched. The king's ships laid a loose cordon around Pike, though the violent waters made an exact blockade difficult. Tywin's troops landed on the rocky beaches below the fortress. Catapults and siege towers were useless here. The only way to assault Pike was by crossing the narrow bridges or scaling the steep cliffs. Rhaegar elected to split his force. Half would besiege the base of the fortress, cutting off all approach, while a contingent of ships stood ready to bombard any Ironborn positions with scorpion bolts and flaming arrows. The approach was slow, dangerous. Archers from the towers unleashed arrows upon them, and the swirling surf claimed more than one man who lost his footing. Yet bit by bit, they advanced, capturing the outer walkways, forcing Ironborn defenders to retreat deeper into the keep. Rhaegar fought at the front, wearing lighter armor for agility on the precarious bridges. He led a column of knights across a swaying plank bridge, battered by wind and spray, while Ironborn tried to hold them off with throwing axes. One axe whipped past Rhaegar's ear, slicing a lock of silver hair before it spun into the sea. Barristan shoved forward, shield raised, deflecting another. They pressed on, step by nerve-wracking step, until they reached a small courtyard on a rocky outcrop. The Ironborn scrambled back through a gatehouse, sealing it behind them. Tywin's men flanked from another angle, attacking a second bridge. Soon, the outer defenses fell. The Ironborn withdrew to the final tower where Balon supposedly waited. A lull settled as both sides caught their breath. Rhaegar dispatched a herald to shout one final offer of surrender. He heard only silence for a time, then a lone voice bellowing curses from the tower window. Balon's voice, ragged but resolute, shouted, "I will never kneel to a dragon. I am the drowned god's chosen. Come face me if you dare." With a resigned shake of his head, Rhaegar rallied the men for the last push. They battered down the gate with iron-tipped rams, braving boiling oil poured from above. Smoke coiled in the salty air. Fighting erupted in narrow corridors, a savage melee where the Ironborn used every advantage of the cramped, twisting passages. More men fell, their screams echoing in the gloom. Rhaegar advanced steadily, sword glinting in torchlight, stepping over bodies, the weight of each kill pressing heavier on his conscience. Finally, they reached Balon Greyjoy's hall. A cluster of Ironborn stood guard outside the doors, but they were no match for the king's knights. With a crash, the doors were forced open, revealing the self-proclaimed king of the Iron Islands standing on a dais, wearing battered armor emblazoned with the Kraken of House Greyjoy. His hair was wild, a bristling mane of gray and black, and his eyes burned with defiance. He held a long axe in both hands, the blade stained with blood. Whether his or his foes, it was impossible to tell. Rhaegar stepped forward, ignoring the swirl of battle behind him. "Balon Greyjoy," he called, voice echoing off the stone walls. "It's over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your men lie dead or captured. Surrender and let us end this." Balon sneered, raising his axe. "The Ironborn do not surrender. You'll take my head, but my sons will avenge me and the sea will claim your precious kingdom." Rhaegar tightened his grip on his sword. "Don't throw away more lives." Balon let out a harsh laugh, then charged. His axe swept in a vicious arc, aimed for Rhaegar's chest. Rhaegar sidestepped, the blade whistling past, slamming into the floor with a jarring clang. Balon recovered quickly, swinging back. The clang of steel against steel filled the hall as Rhaegar parried, feeling the man's raw strength reverberate in his arms. Balon was older but driven by fanaticism. Each blow threatened to crack bone or shred armor. Rhaegar circled, seeking an opening. Balon advanced, snarling curses, jabbing with the butt of the axe, forcing Rhaegar to pivot. For a moment, the king's foot slipped on a slick patch of blood. Balon seized the moment, smashing Rhaegar's shield aside. Rhaegar managed to twist away, the axe biting into the shield's rim instead of his arm. With a grunt, Rhaegar brought his sword around in a tight swing, aimed at Balon's side. The Kraken Lord shifted, but not enough. Steel bit flesh, and Balon staggered, hissing in pain. Yet he did not yield. He slammed the axe down in a desperate overhead strike. Rhaegar braced, crossing his sword and shield to block. The impact jarred him to the core, but he held firm. Balon's arms trembled. In that moment of hesitation, Rhaegar thrust upward. His sword pierced Balon's mail under the armpit. Balon gasped, eyes wide, dropping his axe. He stumbled back, sinking to his knees. Blood seeped through the links of chain. Rhaegar lowered his guard, breath ragged. Guards rushed in, weapons raised, but Rhaegar gestured them back. He stepped closer to Balan, who glared up at him with fading strength. "Kill me, dragon," Balan spat. "Kill me and be done." A hush filled the hall. Tywin, arriving through the shattered doors, looked on with cold expectation. Barristan watched from the flank, sword raised. Wounded Ironborn lay scattered across the floor, groaning or silent. Rhaegar forced air into his lungs. "You fought to the end. Surrender now or die here. The choice is yours." Balan coughed, spitting blood. "I will not say the words. I will not bend." Then he let out a ragged laugh. "But it matters not. My war is lost." Tywin stepped forward. "End this farce, your grace. He deserves no mercy." Rhaegar gazed at the battered man. Balan Greyjoy had caused countless deaths, brought ruin to his own people, and refused every overture of peace. Still, as Rhaegar looked in Balan's eyes, he saw only the reflection of a broken man consumed by pride. Did the laws of war demand an execution? Or would the realm be better served by a living hostage? He thought of Robert Baratheon, once kneeling in the river, hate burning in his eyes. He had spared Robert. Yet Robert's hatred still lingered, threatening to ignite anew. What would come of sparing Balan? The hall was silent, every eye on the king. Rhaegar slowly raised his sword. Balan's breath came shallow, his face twisted in pain, but he met Rhaegar's gaze, defiance lingering even in mortal defeat. Rhaegar let the sword's point rest at Balan's neck. "In the name of the Seven, I sentence you." He paused, feeling the weight of the realm on his shoulders. Tywin's stare was a hawk's glare, urging lethal finality. Barristan's eyes were calm, trusting the king's judgment. The Ironborn captives braced for their lord's end. The old vow of justice and mercy flickered in Rhaegar's mind. Finally, he forced the words, "To die for your treason." With one swift motion, Rhaegar drove the sword through Balan's throat. A final garbled gasp escaped the man's lips as he toppled sideways. Blood poured across the stones, his eyes dimming. The hall seemed to exhale as if all at once. Rhaegar stepped back, wiping his sword on a fallen banner. His chest felt hollow. It was done. There would be no hostage king to provoke future uprisings, no living symbol for the Ironborn to rally around. Perhaps Balan's heirs might still lay claim to the Iron Islands, but with Balan dead and his fleet destroyed, the rebellion would disintegrate. The Ironborn who remained would have little choice but to kneel or face extinction. Tywin let out a long breath. "Justice is served, your grace." Yet Rhaegar took no solace in the moment. His hand shook as he sheathed the sword. Another war ended in a single, brutal act. Another wave of blood spilled. He thought of Elia and the children waiting somewhere beyond the storm-lashed seas, counting on him to bring peace. He prayed that this time the peace might hold. The days that followed were spent securing the Iron Islands. Balan's surviving relatives, his sons, Theon among them, though still a boy, were taken into custody. Some lesser Ironborn lords bent the knee immediately, hoping to salvage what remained of their holdings. Others were hunted down if they refused, though resistance was sporadic and quickly crushed. Rhaegar installed a royal governor to oversee reconstruction and mandated that the Ironborn pay reparations to the coasts they had raided. He also decreed that Balan's children would be fostered in mainland courts, ensuring they would grow up away from the old way that had led their father to ruin. It was a hard measure, but one Rhaegar deemed necessary to break the cycle of rebellion. In time, the battered ships of the royal fleet hoisted sails and departed, carrying exhausted men back toward the mainland. Rhaegar lingered just long enough to see Pike's battered towers under new banners, the Targaryen dragon flying above the Kraken. The ghost of Balan seemed to hang in those damp halls, a warning of what pride could wreak. Rhaegar left behind a garrison of loyal soldiers entrusted with keeping order until new local leadership could be confirmed. A few Ironborn chafed, but they had no fleet, no real chance to defy the throne again, at least for now. When Rhaegar finally returned to King's Landing, the city greeted him with cheers. Trumpeters on the walls sounded a triumphant fanfare, and throngs gathered in the streets to watch the victorious ships come into port. The war had lasted many months, but its end brought relief to every corner of Westeros tired of upheaval. Rhaegar stepped onto the quay, flanked by Barristan and Tywin, greeted by Elia Martell in regal attire, with Rhaenys and Aegon at her side. The children raced forward, ignoring protocol, hugging their father's legs. Rhaegar knelt to embrace them, tears pricking his eyes at the simple joy of their welcome. Elia was more reserved, though her eyes shone with feeling as she touched Rhaegar's mail-clad arm. "You are home," she said simply, her voice choked. He rose, pressing his forehead gently to hers. The crowd cheered, seeing their royal family reunited. Yet even in that celebratory moment, Rhaegar felt the weight of loss. For every soldier who returned triumphant, others did not return at all. For every Ironborn raider, there had been some spark of life snuffed out in the name of pride. He walked through the city streets amid the celebrations, remembering the fallen. Men hailed him as a king who had ended 2 rebellions with firm resolve, but he carried a sorrow that no amount of cheering could dispel. In the days that followed, the realm settled again. Lords who had begun to question Rhaegar's willingness to use force saw that he was capable of decisive, even lethal action. Tywin Lannister's reputation rose once more as the man who had orchestrated much of the supply lines and strategy. The realm's other lords, tired of war, quietly accepted that House Targaryen had reasserted itself. The small folk, for their part, only hoped that the fighting was truly done. Rumors spread that the Iron Islands would be subdued for a generation, that the North had shown its loyalty by sending ships, that no corner of Westeros could stand against the new king's combined mercy and might. Gradually, Rhaegar returned to the tasks of peace. He met with Ned Stark, who had come south to confirm the details of the Ironborn captives and ensure northern interests were addressed. Lyanna too had remained in the city, quietly assisting with charitable works, though the moment she saw Rhaegar after his return, she embraced him briefly, weeping in relief that he had survived. Elia bore witness to that moment, and though she did not intervene, her eyes flickered with an acceptance tinged by sadness. Some wounds would never vanish, but they had found a way to coexist. Rhaegar spent time with his council, pushing forward the reforms he had begun before the war. The new codes of law were refined, including clauses regarding maritime conduct, aimed at preventing future Ironborn outrages. He arranged for the hosting of Balon's young heir, Theon, as a ward in a loyal household, eventually settling upon House Stark at Ned's suggestion, believing that the old enmity between Northmen and Ironborn could be tempered by such a fostering. As the months rolled on, a brittle calm spread over Westeros. Lords returned to their lands, harvests resumed, trade revived. The memory of Robert's rebellion and the Ironborn War lingered, but people spoke with guarded hope of the Dragon King, who had proven both merciful and strong. Rhaegar took no pleasure in the destruction wrought, yet he saw how it had cemented his standing. No lord would lightly rise against him now, not with Robert Baratheon subdued at Storm's End and Balon Greyjoy lying in a shallow grave on Pike. It was in the midst of this uneasy calm that a new question emerged, one that Rhaegar had only barely begun to consider: the threat beyond the wall. Rumors trickled in from the Night's Watch of strange sightings in the haunted forest, of wildlings claiming the cold winds carried omens of dark creatures stirring. Rhaegar remembered the old stories of the Long Night, the White Walkers, the prophecies. He had been so consumed with war in the south and west that he had spared little thought for the far north. Now he wondered if the ancient threat in those legends might one day loom larger than any human rivalry. He broached the subject with Ned Stark in a private meeting. Ned, seated by the hearth in the king's solar, stroked the worn oak of his chair. "I have heard the same rumors, your grace. My brother Benjen is a ranger of the Night's Watch. He writes that the wildlings are restless, that they whisper about dead things walking. But the watch is small and the realm is weary. Few pay heed to old ghost stories." Rhaegar turned a cup of wine in his hands, remembering the mystic sense that had once driven him to seek union between ice and fire. Ghost stories or not, we cannot ignore them. We must ensure the wall is manned. If there is any real threat, we must be ready. Ned inclined his head. "I agree. But you have fought 2 wars now, and the realm is not eager to spend gold on the watch. Perhaps you could send more supplies at least, and encourage recruits. Maybe criminals offered a chance at redemption." Rhaegar nodded, a resolve crystallizing. "I will do so. And I will visit the wall myself within the next year if the realm remains at peace." The Night's Watch deserves the king's attention. Ned looked faintly surprised, then impressed. Many kings have neglected that duty. It would mean much to the watch. And to the north. So that became yet another item on Rhaegar's growing list of tasks for the realm, securing the northern border against possible supernatural threats. Even as the immediate conflicts subsided, new specters rose on the edges of the map. But for the moment, the realm carried on. Trade flourished, the smallfolk dared to hope for a bountiful harvest, and ballads spread of the Harpist king who had pacified rebellions without descending into tyranny. As the second year of Rhaegar's reign neared its end, King's Landing saw a spate of weddings and feasts. Peaceful times, however tenuous, encouraged alliances and matches. Lords traveled to the capital with daughters and sons, hoping to secure favor or a good marriage. Elia Martell presided over many of these ceremonies, smiling with the quiet relief of one who sees normalcy returning. Even Lyanna attended some, though she lingered on the fringes, politely declining proposals that came her way. She told Ned she would return to Winterfell soon, but for reasons unknown, she delayed. Perhaps it was the subtle bond with Rhaegar, or perhaps she found a sense of purpose in the charities she'd established. The city's orphans adored her, they called her the Wolf Lady, and eagerly ran to meet her whenever she appeared. Amid those festivities, Rhaegar continued to reweave the tapestry of unity. He met with Robert Baratheon in a short but tense audience. Robert came at the urging of his retainers, if only to confirm that Storm's End had no intention of rebellion. The two men exchanged few words, but Robert did not hurl curses this time. He merely glowered, acknowledged Rhaegar's victory over the Ironborn, and left after formal pleasantries. Progress, if only by inches. In the Red Keep's yard one afternoon, Rhaegar watched his children at play. Rhaenys was showing Aegon how to twirl a wooden sword. The boy giggled, whacking the air while his sister gave instructions. Elia stood nearby, conversing with Oberyn Martell, who had journeyed to court again. Beyond them, Rhaegar saw Lyanna strolling along the ramparts, gazing out over the city. A crisp autumn breeze tugged her dark hair loose from its braid. For a moment, Rhaegar felt the strangeness of it all. Elia and Lyanna both here, alive, the realm at relative peace, yet so many scars just beneath the surface. He walked to the ramparts, leaving his children in Oberyn's boisterous care. As he approached, Lyanna turned, a small smile touching her lips. They stood side by side, arms resting on the warm stone, looking down at King's Landing bustling below. Vendors called their wares, fisherfolk carried nets, and a swirl of life moved along the crowded streets. Lyanna spoke first, her tone reflective. It seems almost normal now, doesn't it? The city so full of noise and color. If you didn't know better, you wouldn't guess the wars that tore it apart. Rhaegar nodded. People have a way of rebuilding if given the chance. She looked out toward the distant horizon, where the waters of Blackwater Bay shimmered. I've decided to return to Winterfell soon. Ned and Catelyn have invited me to see my nephew, Robb. He's grown so much in my absence. It's time I truly faced home. Rhaegar felt a pang, though he had known this was coming. You have done much good here. The orphans will miss you. She smiled softly. I'll miss them too. But a Stark belongs in the north. Winter is coming, after all. A hint of a wry smile touched her lips at the old saying. She paused, searching his face. I don't regret coming here, Rhaegar. We found some closure, I think. And I see now that you belong with your family, Elia, your children, the realm. That doesn't erase what we shared. But I accept it. He swallowed, memories flickering. The quiet nights at Harrenhal, the hush of the Godswood, the swirl of prophecy. I never meant for any of this to bring so much pain. If I could undo the war. She laid a hand gently on his arm. We can't change the past. We can only move forward. You've done more for peace than anyone else could have. I hope the realm appreciates it. They stood in silence a moment longer. Then Lyanna let out a soft sigh, stepping away from the battlements. I should finish packing. I leave in 2 days with a small escort. I'll come say goodbye before I go. Rhaegar nodded, struggling to form words. Finally, he found them. Thank you for everything you've done here, and for forgiving me enough to come. She gave a small, brave smile. Farewell, Rhaegar. May the gods watch over you. As she walked away, Rhaegar felt an ache in his chest, yet also a quiet sense of resolution. There had been a time when he believed their union was destiny. Perhaps in another life it would have been. But in this life, the realm demanded a king and queen who would guide it without fracturing it anew. He gazed down at the city once more, letting the autumn breeze dry the hint of tears on his cheeks. With Lyanna returning north, the last visible shadow of the war was departing. The realm moved on. Not long after Lyanna departed King's Landing, a handful of orphans ran after her litter at the city gates, waving and calling farewells. She tossed them small gifts, carved wooden figures of wolves, reminders that they had once had a champion among them. Ned, waiting for her in the Riverlands, would escort her the rest of the way home. The news of her departure sparked a quiet ripple of chatter in the court, but no scandal. The time of rumors about the Stark maiden and the Targaryen prince had passed into memory, overshadowed by the new stories of war and victory. And so, the years continued under the reign of King Rhaegar Targaryen, second of his name. In the capital, crafts thrived, laws were refined, and a certain cautious optimism took root. The scars of rebellion and the Ironborn War lingered, but Rhaegar took steps to heal them. He placed capable stewards in the Iron Islands, forging uneasy alliances with those Ironborn who accepted the new order. He maintained watchful relations with Robert Baratheon, ensuring Storm's End remained docile. Tywin Lannister served as hand, orchestrating finances and governance with a ruthless competence that kept many lesser lords in line. Elia Martell, for her part, grew into her role as queen consort more fully. She championed the charities Lyanna had established, extended them throughout the realm, and garnered affection from small folk who saw her as gracious and empathetic. Rhaenys blossomed into a bright young lady, her wit charming the court, while Aegon showed early promise with the sword as well as a keen mind for tactics that made his father proud. Sometimes Rhaegar would catch Elia gazing at the children with a mix of joy and a hidden sadness, perhaps remembering the heartbreaks they had endured. But time eased the ache, and with each passing day, their family bond grew stronger. One crisp morning, Rhaegar oversaw the final draft of the unified code of laws known as the Dragon's Peace. Lords from all over Westeros had contributed, haggling over details for months. But the result was a milestone, a single legal framework binding the Seven Kingdoms more firmly than ever before. It offered protections for small folk, guidelines for just treatment of criminals, and limits to the crown's right to punish without trial, a pointed legacy that would stand in stark contrast to the Mad King's arbitrary cruelty. Rhaegar affixed his seal and declared the code official, hoping it would endure beyond his lifetime. As he handed the last parchment to the scribe, he felt a stirring in his chest. Perhaps, despite the tragedies and battles, the realm was truly healing. There would always be threats, ambitious lords, foreign intrigues, the uncertain omens from beyond the wall, but for now the kingdom stood stronger than it had in years. He had walked through fire, through heartbreak, and emerged determined to unify rather than destroy. That evening, as dusk fell over King's Landing, Rhaegar lingered in the courtyard where a single white weirwood tree stood, transplanted from the north ages ago. Its pale trunk and crimson leaves shimmered in the torchlight, a silent reminder of the old gods. He found himself thinking of Lyanna, the prophecy, the song of ice and fire. Perhaps the gods had not intended him to fulfill it in the way he once believed. Perhaps their true intention was to show that, in forging unity and compassion, a greater victory could be won than any single prophecy could promise. Elia found him there, stepping quietly at his side. She laced her fingers through his, resting her head on his shoulder. They stood under the rustling leaves, the city sounds muted beyond the walls. After a time, she said softly, "I think you've given them hope, Rhaegar. More than that, you've given them justice." He squeezed her hand gently, taking comfort in her presence. "I only did what I believed I must. There's still so much left undone." She smiled, dark eyes warm. "A king's work is never done. But you don't have to do it alone." He turned to her, placing a soft kiss on her brow. In that moment, the burdens on his shoulders felt lighter, if only just enough. They walked back inside, arm in arm, the last glimmer of sunset fading behind them. From Dorne's red mountains to the glacial fields of the north, from the green hills of the Reach to the rocky spires of the Vale, the people of Westeros continued on, rebuilding their lives, forging alliances, and remembering the horrors of the recent wars. Many sang new songs of King Rhaegar, the merciful dragon who defeated a stag and a kraken, who dethroned a mad tyrant but spared his enemies when he could, whose love for harp songs and quiet reflection seemed at odds with the violence he had been forced to commit. It was said he strove always to keep the realm's welfare at heart, placing duty above all else, even above his own dreams. In lonely corners of the land, some whispered that the true threat lay in the far north, stirring in the frozen wastes. Others muttered that polygamy might have saved the realm from one heartbreak or another, that Targaryen traditions should never have been cast